Chapter 320. Geor Chapter 305 Disparity. Shea gave a harumph, and casually took a few steps forward. Then, he stood within the forest, and pulled out the flaming fork. He brandished it with his hand. The flaming fork flew up and down in his hand as he practiced the annihilation of armies. However, in Shea's mind, those moves had naturally become firewood chopping style, fire gouging style, and other similar names. He fought for a while, and when he finally stopped, a red light flashed in his eyes. Suddenly, a red light burst out from the fiery fork, and with a cracking sound, a big tree in the distance was broken in half. As Shea stood still, a lot of branches suddenly fell down from the big trees around him. The broken parts of each branch were extremely smooth. Shea looked around, feeling quite proud in his heart. He had been training every day, and even while marching, he didn't dare to slack off. The combination of the crimson killing intent and the annihilation of armies had greatly increased its power. Additionally, after practicing for so many days, it would appear that his strength had indeed increased. After he stopped, he suddenly heard a sneer from the side. Raising his head, he saw that Hastings had already sat up. There was a faint smile on his face as he looked at Chen Xiaoyan. It seemed that this fellow had observed the entire process of him practicing the annihilation of armies. Hastings looked at Shea. His gaze swept from Shea's face to the flaming fork in Shea's hand. After a while, he retracted his gaze. Then, he suddenly closed his eyes and gave a soft sigh. Shea gave a harumph and said, "Even if Lao Tzu's strength is not as good as yours, what I am practicing is naturally unbearable in your eyes. However, there is no need for you to look down on others." Hastings opened his eyes and looked at Shea. Surprisingly, his eyes softened and he hesitated for a moment. Then, he said softly, "I am not sighing because I am looking down on your ability. Rather, this annihilation of armies of my teacher is something that I have not seen used for many years. Just now, when I suddenly saw you practicing, I was reminded of the time when Master taught me martial arts." Hastings was originally a cold person, but at this moment, these few words revealed a bit of warmth. He looked at Shea for a long time, and finally said in a low voice, "Forget it, on account of my teacher's sentiments. Shea, after all, you are teacher's successor. As long as you are willing to betray the Byzantine Empire and join Odin's side, serve by my side, never become my enemy, and help me take revenge, I will naturally nurture you well. Your talent is also extremely good. If I guide you well, you might be able to reach my current realm in 10 years. As for the prophecy, as long as you stay by my side and work with me, I don't think there will be anything." Before he could finish, Shea's face darkened. He looked at Hastings and sneered, "No?" "What did you say?" Shea laughed loudly and pointed at his mouth. "Look at Lao Tzu's mouth, no." Hastings's face suddenly became gloomy. "When I saw you practicing just now, I pulled out some of my nostalgia, so I really wanted to let you go. As long as you agree, I will naturally treat you like a brother from now on. I will no longer have any killing intent. I was soft-hearted and opened my mouth. If I wait until tomorrow, even if you kneel down and beg me, I will not agree." "Lao Tzu does not care." Shea snorted and lightly tapped the fire fork in his hand. With a buzz, Shea sneered, "I see Odin as my mortal enemy. Just like how you see Byzantium as your enemy. I can't beat you now, so it's fine if I compromise. But if you want me to submit to Odin, you might as well kill me now and be done with it. Lao Tzu has already made an oath that I will oppose Odin for the rest of my life." Hastings sat there and looked at Shea's resolute expression. Seeing that Shea had rejected him, he should have been angry, but suddenly, he was in a trance. The Shea in front of him had a young face and a determined expression. He held the fire fork in his hand and stood proudly. This appearance was just like when he was learning martial arts under his teacher. He also had a blood feud and swore to oppose Byzantium until the end. Looking at this proud young man in front of him, it was just like him many years ago. There was still a bit of anger in his heart, but it dissipated in an instant. Looking at the Shea in front of him, Hastings felt that it was difficult to summon up any anger or killing intent in his heart. After a moment of silence, he suddenly stood up and walked slowly to Shea with the tri-edged war spear in his hand. He looked at Shea and said lightly, "You won't be able to train by yourself. The Crimson killing intent and the 1,000 Army Destroyer are all killing moves. If it's not a real battle, no matter how much you train, it won't have any effect." After saying that, he waved the tri-edged war spear in his hand and sneered, "Come and attack me." Shea stared blankly at Hastings. "Could it be that you're angry because I rejected you just now and want to take the opportunity to kill me?" Hastings laughed loudly. "If I want to kill you, I can do it at any time. Stop talking nonsense. It's rare that I have the mood to train you today. If I get annoyed later, even if you beg me, it won't work." Shea's heart skipped a beat. Since it's a spar, then, how could Hastings not know what Shea was thinking? He sneered, "Don't worry, I will only defend and not attack. Come and attack me. If you have the ability to hurt me, then I will consider you powerful." Shea sneered and took 2 steps back. His face quickly calmed down. He held the fire fork in his hand and quickly took out the crystal and embedded it in the handle of the fire fork. He stared at Hastings and soon, a mass of red light burst out from his body. He saw that Shea had received his promise, but he was not in a hurry to attack. Instead, he retreated and steadied himself. He was carefully observing him, looking for an opportunity. Hastings's eyes flashed with a trace of admiration. This kid likes to talk nonsense, but when it comes to a real battle, he is calm and not impatient. Finally, Shea shouted and the red light on the fire fork shone brightly. With a boom, a mass of red flame swept forward like a flame. Hastings stood there motionlessly, waiting for the mass of red flame to sweep over. He gently waved the tri-edged war spear in his hand. It danced like a wheel and a mass of black chi wall formed in front of him. The red killing intent crashed into the chi wall and was immediately pushed back. However, Shea wasn't afraid at all. He had already rushed up with 3 large strides. His body flew up, and in an instant, a little red starlight burst out from the fire fork. A wisp of thin red light, like a silk thread, instantly shot over. Dragon thrust. The light from the dragon thrust penetrated Hastings's tri-edged war spear's black chi shield. Hastings' eyes lit up, and his body seemed to have moved a little. The starlight from the dragon thrust penetrated the black chi shield and was only a few inches away from Hastings's face. However, when Hastings swayed, the distance between them seemed to be stretched infinitely. Originally, under the effect of the crimson murderous aura, Shea's mental strength had increased by several times. In his vision, all kinds of reactions had become several times sharper. Even the enemy's movements had become slow under his vision. However, this slight movement of Hastings's body was not an ordinary dodging action. It was the standard ability of an expert. It could easily distort the laws of time and speed. In Shea's eyes, Hastings's movement was very awkward in his eyes. It was as though all of a sudden, his various senses were unable to capture Hastings. His heart was so vexed that he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He watched as Hastings's hand suddenly moved. He retracted his tri-edged war spear and lightly tapped it 3 times in an instant. Each of these 3 light taps was like using the tip of the spear to strike the red light from the dragon thrust that Shea had unleashed. Immediately, Shea's mind seemed to hear a crisp, shattering sound. Looking at the power of the dragon thrust, the red thread had actually broken into several pieces. Shea's mouth suddenly opened wide and he was stunned on the spot. Light could also be cut? With a pop, Hastings inserted his spear into the ground again. He looked at Shea with some surprise in his eyes. The power of your move just now was not small. It doesn't seem to be teacher's move to destroy an army. Shea's heart was still in shock when he saw that Hastings could even cut off light. But then the crimson murderous aura and the side effects of the dragon thrust came back, and he suddenly cried out in pain. His hand loosened and the fire fork fell to the ground. He knelt on the spot and his whole body trembled. The muscles in his body spasmed and his face turned red in an instant. Hastings stood there and watched the changes in Shea. He did not move and just stared at Shea. After a while, seeing that Shea's trembling had gradually calmed down, Hastings nodded and sighed softly. "Well, I understand. Your move just now was extremely powerful, but it seems that the burden on your body is too great. After using it, not only will it hurt the enemy, it will also hurt yourself." He looked at Shea, who was gradually recovering his consciousness, and said seriously, "Remember this principle. Although this move with too much backlash is powerful, it is not the right way to go. If you want to have a greater breakthrough in your strength, this kind of trick will not work." Shea was lying there. After the spasms, all the strength in his body was drained. He felt that his mouth was crooked. After hearing Hastings' words, although he wanted to refute, he could not say a single word. He thought to himself, the reason why Lao Tzu's dragon thrust had such a huge backlash was because it was a move of the Dragon Knight. The Dragon Knight had his dragon mount to share the burden of the backlash, so there was no problem. Lao Tzu had to bear it alone. Damn it! Didn't I establish a life-sharing contract with Demandras? Shouldn't it help me bear some of the backlash? However, after thinking about it carefully, the backlash from using Dragon Thrust was indeed much smaller than before. But it still did not seem to have reached a normal level, right? If the ancient Dragon Knight had a mount to share the burden of every move, he would still feel pain like he did. How could he fight like that? After lying down for a while, Shea felt that his strength was gradually recovering. He forced himself to stand up and pick up the fire fork. Suddenly, he heard Hastings say coldly, "Have you rested enough? Then let's do it again." Again? Shea was stunned. Hastings frowned and said, "The path of cultivation is to temper your body and will. The more you reach your limit, the more you have to grit your teeth and persevere in order to achieve a breakthrough. Otherwise, no matter how diligent you are in your cultivation, you will be stuck in the same spot." After saying that, the corners of his mouth curled into a sneer. "Don't use that powerful killing move of yours. Just use the crimson killing intent and the 1,000 army obliteration. Let me see what level your true strength is at." Shea had originally thought that Hastings was taking the opportunity to torture him. However, he suddenly heard, "The more you reach your limit, the more you have to grit your teeth and persevere in order to achieve a breakthrough. Otherwise, no matter how diligent you are in your cultivation, you will be stuck in the same spot." When he said that, his heart skipped a beat. Although he had been cultivating regularly, he was no longer as hard-working as he was back in the mountains. At least, when he was in the mountains, the old man said that he would not teach him. However, when he was really practicing, the old man would watch from the side. When he was exhausted and wanted to rest, the old man would randomly pick up a stick to beat him, forcing him to practice for another 2 hours. Now that he thought about it, back then, he had thought that the old man was deliberately bullying him. But now he was afraid that the old man was the real deal. After he left the mountains, he did not have the old man's supervision. Although he still cultivated every day, he would only rest when he was tired. Although he was still hard-working, he was no longer as hard-working as he was under the old man's supervision. "Don't sit there pretending to be dead," Hastings sneered. "In our sect, the teacher must have strengthened our bodies since we were young. Presumably, you have also been soaking in the medicinal bath prepared by the teacher since you were young, right? You idiot, you don't understand the teacher's painstaking efforts. Our bodies have been soaked in that special medicinal bath for more than 10 years. The toughness of our bodies has long surpassed that of ordinary people by many times. When ordinary people practice martial arts to a certain extent, they will reach their limit. However, our bodies have been strengthened. Originally, the limit of our bodies is much stronger than ordinary people. In terms of cultivation, it is already very beneficial. You don't know how to cherish this opportunity. Are you 18 or 19 years old this year? Do you know that when I was 18 years old, my cultivation was much stronger than yours now? Shea was provoked by Hastings's last sentence. He shouted loudly and pounced forward with the flaming fork in his hand. Although the backfire of the dragon's stab had just disappeared and his strength was far from recovering, under such anger, the crimson murderous aura once again burst out. This time, he did not use the dragon stab. He had just used it once and could not use it consecutively in a short period of time. He only used the crimson murderous aura, and the army of 1,000 annihilation moved to greet Hastings. Suddenly, a red light could be seen. Under the red light, the shadows of the flaming fork joined together and enveloped Hastings like a tidal wave. Hastings also kept his words. He only waved his tri-edged war spear. On top of the war spear, there was a dark, resplendent black flame aura. He did not counterattack and only focused on defense. The war spear was like the wind, blocking left and right. He easily received Shea's storm-like attack. Shea only felt that his body was completely exhausted. Even brandishing the fire fork caused unbearable pain in his arm. However, after using the crimson killing aura and combining it with the annihilation of 1,000 armies, he had madly attacked. He should have already passed his limit, but his originally sluggish body's movements instead became increasingly smooth little by little. Originally, there were some rough parts in his set of martial arts, but now he was faintly more flexible and skillful. After fighting like this for a while, his hands and feet became more agile. It seemed that the flaming fork in his hand was also more handy. Unfortunately, no matter how Shea attacked, even if the attacks were as fierce as thunder, in the hands of Hastings, the tri-edged war spear was casually swung and easily neutralized. Unknowingly, Shea's army of 1,000 annihilation was used over 10 times. Only then did he finally feel dizzy. After a vertical slash was blocked by Hastings's long spear, Shea retreated a few steps. Suddenly, his legs went soft and he sat on the ground. At this time, he was really so tired that he could not even lift his fingers. However, this kind of exhaustion was different from the backlash of the dragon piercing. There was no intense pain in his body. It was as if his body was emptied. He was so tired that he could not even lift his eyelids. However, his mind was still clear. He took a deep breath and listened to his pounding heart. When he closed his eyes, he was surprised to find that the sensitivity of his various senses to the outside world seemed to be 3 times stronger than usual. However, he had clearly retracted the crimson murderous aura. How could he still have such keen senses? After panting for another quarter of an hour, that marvelous and sensitive sensation gradually blurred and returned to its normal state. However, in Shea's heart, there was a faint, strange feeling. It was as if he really had a small breakthrough. Although this breakthrough seemed very, very small, faintly, he seemed to have grasped a trick. Hastings gently inserted the tri-edged war spear into the ground beside him. Looking at Shea, he nodded. Not bad. This time, you have reached the real limit. That's all for today. You don't have to practice anymore. If you continue, it will harm your body. Pausing, he frowned. However, I have overestimated your strength. Your attack just now was your true level of strength. In my opinion, you're only a warrior of the 7th rank, barely reaching the 8th rank. However, that powerful killing move of yours could instantly raise your killing power to the peak of the 9th grade. Let me give you a word of advice. Using that killing move too much is useless. If you use it for a short period of time, you will use up all your strength in a short period of time. Instead, it will cause your body to not be fully tempered. Let's talk about something. I will be going to Shanghai on Wednesday to participate in this year's CJ exhibition, China Joy. The online game manufacturer of Lie Nation will also launch a game at this exhibition. I will naturally be there. If you want to watch me, please remember that the address is Exhibition Hall 1. _. As for the specific address, you can search this year's CJ exhibition on Baidu. Yes, Lie Nation's online game is already in public beta. The download address can be found on the official website of Lie Nation, www.liegua.com. Isn't the address easy to remember? It is Lie Nation in Chinese pinyin. Because it is still in beta, there will be changes in the future. If there are any bugs, you will be rewarded if you mention them. I am looking forward to the game's guard system. After all, bringing a large number of different types of troops to fight monsters or PvP between players is quite fun. Do you want to build your own army or mage guard? Give it a try. What? You like to fight one-on-one? You are out. Now we are playing a group fight. Humph. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 321. GOR Chapter 306, Come Down. After resting, Hastings did not say anything else. He simply walked back and found a tree. Leaning against it, he inserted the tri-edged war spear into the ground beside him. It did not take long for his breathing to become steady. Shea's mind was in a mess. Although he had also leaned down, he was unable to fall asleep. Tonight, he had sparred with Hastings and had even given him pointers. Emotionally, Shea was unwilling to believe what Hastings had said. After all, it was strange for him to believe the words of an enemy. However, there was a faint trace of understanding in his mind. This fellow's words made a lot of sense. At the very least, this person was a true expert. No matter what, this person's realm was higher than his by a large margin. Naturally, this person's knowledge was also much greater than his. Thinking about it carefully, ever since he had learned the dragon thrust, he had been able to defeat ordinary enemies with one blow. However, if he were to encounter a powerful enemy, it was basically useless. However, every time he practiced, he would use up all of his energy after using the dragon thrust. He could no longer practice anymore. After such a long time, it seemed that his progress was much slower than he had expected. Actually, Hastings's words were not difficult to understand. How could there be any shortcuts when it came to improving one's martial arts? Always using the dragon thrust, a move with a powerful backlash, to force out a power that was beyond his normal level. It might work for a while, but if he were to use it for a long time, it would only hinder his progress. It seemed that his true strength was just as Hastings had said. He had barely reached the level of an 8th-level warrior. Compared to Philip before he was injured, this level of strength was not much higher. Back then, he was able to defeat Philip only through shortcuts. Now that he thought about it, although he was quite diligent in his daily training, it was rare for him to reach the level of intensity that he had sparred with Hastings tonight. The path of martial arts could only be slowly accumulated. Although the improvement wouldn't be obvious in a short period of time, it required a lot of perseverance and hard work. Previously, he had relied on a killer move like Dragon Thrust to go astray. Blindly pursuing the power of the Dragon Thrust, he had neglected the tempering of his own foundation. That night, Shea leaned against the tree, half asleep and half awake. Countless thoughts raced through his mind, and he did not know what to feel. After dawn, Shea suddenly jumped up from the ground. Next, he untied his clothes and removed the 2 dragon scales that were hidden beneath his clothes. Using a cloth, he wrapped them up and hung them on the saddle. After a moment's hesitation, he placed the flaming fork back into the leather sheath and tossed it into the bundle. Next, he switched to using an ordinary saber. Shea. Hastings. To the end. After Hastings. After Shea. Then let's go. After the two of them set out, they rushed all the way. Even though Hastings's black horse was a divine steed, after so many days of continuous running, it seemed to be somewhat exhausted. As for Shea's horse, it could no longer hold on. It was running slower and slower on the road. Horses needed fodder. They had been in the wild for the past few days. Using the fodder they brought with them and some hay to feed the horse was not a long-term solution. Fortunately, their destination wasn't too far away. After galloping for a day, they finally arrived at the forest outside the small village where the two of them had met a few days ago. Under the setting sun, the silhouette of the distant village could be clearly seen. However, it was still devoid of any signs of life. Hastings casually parked his black horse beside the forest. He held the horse's head and whispered something into the horse's ear. Then, he gently patted the horse's buttocks. The black horse let out a long neigh and galloped away. Hastings then pulled out a map. He looked at the surrounding terrain and compared it with the setting sun. In the end, he sighed. Sure enough, we took a wrong turn. This is the village up ahead. Shea followed Hastings as they strode toward the village. When they reached the village entrance, they saw the pond. Due to the rainy season having passed, there had been no rain for the past few days. The pond at the village entrance was originally filled with rainwater. Thus, half of it had dried up. Shea could not help but sigh. He smiled wryly and said, "If I had not found your wolves that day, I would not have met you." Hastings grunted and said coolly, "Those two wolves of mine were not easy to tame. But you killed them." Shea snorted. "Not only did you kill them, you nearly ate them." Hastings did not say anything else. He strode into the village. The village was in a dilapidated state. There was only one street. The houses on both sides of the street had collapsed. Some of the doors and windows were wide open. Looking around, all he could see was a dilapidated state. What was so special about this place? This was Shea's third time coming to this village. As he walked beside Hastings, he did not see anything special. Hastings, on the other hand, was very careful. Step by step, his footsteps slowed down. He kept pulling out the map and compared it with the sun and the position of the distant hillside. He walked back and forth on the street 3 times. On the last trip, he used his footsteps to measure the distance. Shea did not know what Hastings was looking for, but from the expression on Hastings's face, he could tell that the thing he was looking for was very important. After walking through the street for 5 times, Shea finally became impatient. He ran to an open area in the middle of the road in the village and casually sat down on a well that had been buried by rocks. He loudly said, "If you like to walk, then go ahead. Running back and forth over and over again, I'm not going to be as stupid as you. You walk slowly. I will sit here. Anyway, this place is only so big. I can't run out of your sight." Hastings ignored Shea and continued to use his footsteps to measure the distance. After a while, he lay down on the ground again. He found a stick and started to write and draw on the ground. It was as if he was trying hard to calculate something. Shea watched quietly from afar. Whenever he was bored, he would take out his water pouch and drink a few mouthfuls of water. The sun had completely set. Only a trace of light could be seen on the distant horizon. The curtain of night gradually fell. Hastings had walked back and forth on the street no less than 20 times. Finally, just as Shea thought that Hastings was going to walk the street for the 21st time, Hastings strode before him. He glanced at Shea, who was sitting on the well platform, and said, "Come down. Do it." Shea was surprised. Hastings pulled him down. Then, he pointed at the well platform that Shea was sitting on earlier and said, "Get to work." Shea's eyes immediately widened. He looked at Hastings's hand and then at the well. The low wall beside the well had been pushed down and rocks of various sizes covered the well. He finally reacted and said, "Son of a bitch, you, don't tell me you want Lao Tzu to move those rocks away for you?" Hastings placed both his hands behind his back, the tri-edged war spear inserted into the ground beside him. He said coldly, "What do you think? Do you think I will personally move those rocks?" Shea said angrily, "Don't you have water in your water pouch? Besides, there are 3 or 4 wells beside this place. Why do you want me to dig this one while I am sitting here? Could it be that you are unhappy because I am sitting there doing nothing?" Hastings sneered and said, "I am not as bored as you. Hurry up and do it. I have already calculated the location. The place I am looking for should be under this well." Under the well? Shea was puzzled. However, there was no doubt in Hastings's eyes. Shea had no choice but to roll up his sleeves and do the work of a porter. Fortunately, Shea was born with great strength, so it didn't take much effort to move these large and small stones. Just as he moved the stones away and exposed the mouth of the well, he immediately smelled a rotten stench rushing out from the mouth of the well. The stench caused Shea to feel dizzy. Then, with a boom, a swarm of flies flew out from the well. "Son of a bitch! Is this well water or a cesspool? Why is it so smelly?" Shea quickly took 2 steps back and used his hand to cover his nose. However, Hastings said something that caused Shea's face to turn pale. "Let me ask you a question. How is your swimming skill?" Hearing those words, Shea was dumbfounded. He stared at Hastings for a good while before abruptly jumping up. "What did you say? Son of a bitch! You don't tell me you want Lao Tzu to jump down?" Hastings's face was calm as he said leisurely, "You are indeed smart. Whatever I am thinking, you guessed it right." Shea shook his head repeatedly. "No way, no way. The stench down there is overwhelming. Lao Tzu will not go down. You're looking for something, not the other way around. If you want to go down yourself." Hastings said indifferently, "Of course, I will go down myself. However, I know nothing about the situation down there. You are the only one here. Naturally, you will be my vanguard." Shea said angrily, "Son of a bitch! If Lao Tzu jumps down, what if there is danger down there? Not to mention the danger, just the stench is enough to kill me. God knows what is down there. What if I die down there? Won't you be breaking your oath?" Hastings's expression did not change. "I only swore that I would not kill you and let you go 3 times. If you go down the well yourself and encounter any danger and die, you can't blame it on me." Shea was speechless. He really could not imagine that when Hastings, the great martial god Odin, put on such a shameless face, it was simply, it was almost the same as Lao Tzu. Tightly holding the triangular spear in his hand, Hastings held the other end and slowly lowered Shea into the well. As soon as Shea entered the well, although his mouth and nose were covered with damp cloth, he still smelled an unstoppable stench and almost fainted. Because it was summer and after soaking in the rain season, the well was extremely humid and the air was extremely turbid. Fortunately, the well was not too deep. When the tri-edged war spear was placed above his head, Shea felt that his toes had touched the surface of the water. He loosened his grip and with a splash, his whole body fell into the water. In this narrow well, as soon as his body entered the water, his feet lost all support and his whole body sank. His ears, mouth, and nose were soaked in the well water. He struggled in the water for a long time before he finally floated up. As soon as his head popped out, he cursed loudly. "Son of a bitch! Which bastard threw these dead dogs and cats into the well? So many corpses soaked in the water, they are F***king maggots. F***ck. F***ck. After saying that, he spat desperately. Thinking of the dirty animal corpses soaked in the well water, there was a dead dog's corpse floating on the water. It was already rotten, and there were maggots slowly crawling on it. Thinking of himself soaked in such water and falling in just now, some of it seemed to have seeped into his mouth and nose. it made him want to vomit again and again. However, as soon as Shea finished cursing, he immediately understood in his heart. Lao Tzu was reaping what he sowed. The people in this village threw down the corpses of these dead cats and dogs. It was basically the strategy of scorching the earth that was ordered in Moore County. In order to resist the invasion of the Odin people, they burned the farmland, burned the food, and polluted the water source. Now, Lao Tzu had a taste of his own medicine. Shea cursed Green's scorched earth strategy in his heart as he tried to tread water. At the mouth of the well, Hastings shouted loudly, "Don't waste time, quickly dive into the water and check it out." Shea was about to refuse when Hastings added, "If you don't listen, I will take back my spear and leave. Think of a way to get out yourself." Shea was furious, but there was nothing he could do. He could only clench his teeth and dive into the depths of the water. His swimming ability was actually very ordinary. However, he had a good foundation in martial arts, and his ability to hold his breath was much stronger than ordinary people. Although the well water was turbid, Shea was born with night vision. After soaking in the water for a while, he suddenly felt what seemed to be a faint mass of light emanating from his bosom. Then, with a "wung" sound, Shea saw the water flow around his body retreating. Suddenly, a waterless space enveloped him. Shea was stunned for a moment. Then, he suddenly recalled something. Back in the underground lair of Demandras, Ada had given him a water avoidance bead. He had always carried this bead with him, and kept it in a small pouch in his bosom. When he first came down, his clothes were not completely soaked. Now that he had soaked in the water for a long time, his clothes were wet. Once the water avoidance bead came into contact with water, it immediately took effect. With the help of the water avoidance bead, Shea continued to sink and no longer felt the pain of being soaked in the dirty water. The water in the well was actually very deep. It was probably more than 10 meters deep. After sinking to the bottom, he saw that there was a horizontal hole in the water. The water channel was narrow, and only one person could barely swim through it. After seeing it clearly, Shea turned around and went back. Along the way, he touched the water surface of the well. After his head popped out, he heard Hastings ask loudly, "How is it?" Shea coughed and shouted, "Not bad, not bad. It is very good down there. The air is good and the water is clean, quickly come down. By the way, I will be going to Shanghai to participate in the CJ exhibition tomorrow morning. I will be busy the whole day tomorrow, so I will not be updating for a day. Please be assured that I will only be doing this for a day. Although I will be in Shanghai until the weekend, I will find time to write. Therefore, I will not be updating tomorrow. Please forgive me. I will be updating normally the day after tomorrow. Also, when I return home, I will compensate everyone for the chapters 10 today. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 322. GOR Chapter 307, Searching. When Hastings entered the well, Shea could not help but make a malicious guess. Will the illustrious war god Odin lose his composure after being soaked in this stinking well water? However, Shea was disappointed. Although the stench from the well is enough to cover all the latrines in the world, Hastings only glanced at Shea after jumping down. His expression was as calm as ever, and there was even a trace of a smile on his face. Seeing the water around Shea being forced away by an invisible force, he smiled faintly and said, "Oh, I didn't expect you to have such an ability. Do you have any magic equipment on you? Water avoidance bead?" Shea snorted and looked at Hastings, who had a normal complexion and was breathing smoothly. "This guy isn't suffering from rhinitis, is he?" After sneezing, Shea's face turned bitter. "Are you not afraid of the stench?" Hastings snorted. "This is nothing. I have been in the army for so many years, I have seen mountains of corpses and seas of blood. In a war many years ago, Byzantium invited the church's magic guild to help. Several magicians worked together to activate a giant fire element magic array. Thousands of soldiers were instantly turned into barbecued meat. It was summer and the corpses rotted in less than 2 days. There was no time to bury them. At that time, I was only a small officer and was sent to clean up the battlefield. Do you know what the smell of thousands of corpses under the scorching sun for a few days? Hearing that, Shea's face turned pale and he nearly vomited. He quickly shouted, "Enough, enough! Stop talking!" Hastings narrowed his eyes and looked at Shea. "Did you look carefully? What did you find in the well water?" "An underground waterway. However, the entrance is very small, barely enough for one person to swim in. Moreover, I do not know how long this waterway is. If I were to rush in and hold my breath, I would drown before I could swim out of the waterway. However, I have the water avoidance bead, so I am not afraid of that. However, after dispersing the water, I would have to use my arms and knees to crawl through the waterway." Hastings nodded and did not say anything else. The two of them continued to dive. With the water avoidance bead, moving underwater became much easier. After diving for over 10 meters, they reached the bottom of the water. Shea reached out with his hand and pointed in the direction of the underground waterway. The waterless space created by the water avoidance bead was more than enough to accommodate 2 people. Hastings looked at the waterway, and a trace of emotion appeared on his face. This subtle change in her expression was noticed by Shea, who was close by. "What's wrong?" Hastings did not answer directly. Instead, he slowly moved toward the waterway opening. Shea followed closely beside Hastings. The two of them stood at the waterway opening. Under the magical power of the water avoidance bead, the surrounding water quickly parted. Hastings's hand reached out and touched the inner side of the waterway opening. Suddenly, he exerted force and pulled out a handful of wet and slippery seaweed. The seaweed then brought down a large amount of wet mud. Hastings's eyes grew brighter and brighter. He waved his hand and slapped it. With a caw sound, large chunks of wet mud on the waterway opening peeled off. After Hastings slapped the originally irregular oval waterway opening several times, large chunks of impurities fell off. Among them were some hard stones. Finally, when the interior of the waterway opening was revealed, Shea was stunned. After the outer layer of impurities had been removed, the interior of the waterway opening was revealed. It was a regular square-shaped entrance. At the same time, the walls of the entrance were angular and flat. There was also a layer of uneven lines on the surface. Shea carefully inspected it but was unable to identify the texture of the object. It did not appear to be metal, nor did it appear to be stone. However, there was one thing that he was certain of. This object was definitely not natural. It was man-made. It was man-made. He turned to look at Hastings. Hastings's originally calm eyes flashed with excitement. "You knew all along you were looking for this place? Where is this place?" Hastings did not answer Shea's question. Instead, he looked at the interior of the waterway opening. It was pitch black and there was no end in sight. Additionally, the area beyond the effective range of the water avoidance bead was still water. "You want to know? Just follow me in. You have no other choice anyway." Hastings gave a harumph and gave Shea a gentle push. "Same old rules, you walk in front." Shea scolded inwardly. However, his strength was inferior and he had no means to resist. He could only pinch his nose and enter the passageway. Although this passageway was man-made, it had been buried under the water for who knows how long, at least. As the military officer of Moore County, Shea had seen the construction maps of the various towns in Moore County. However, he never knew that there was such a damned place beneath the well of this village. The interior of the passageway was bumpy and bumpy. It was originally a square-shaped passageway. However, due to the long period of corrosion under the water, The surface of the passageway was covered with a thick layer of impurities. After being petrified, the impurities became very hard. There were also some underwater silt and lush aquatic plants grew within it. Shea crouched in front. Although the water avoidance bead was blocking the water outside, the passageway was already narrow to begin with. After being filled with so much impurities, it became even more crowded. Shea had a tall stature to begin with. Thus he could only barely crawl forward. Occasionally, he would see some underwater creatures such as fish and shrimps within the waterless space created by the water avoidance bead after being dehydrated. As he crawled forward in the dark, his head bumped into the bumpy passageway countless times. Shea had a stomach full of anger. However, with Hastings glaring at him from behind, there was nothing he could do. After crawling for who knows how long, Shea estimated that it had been more than 2 hours. However, the end of the passageway was still not in sight. After crawling for so long in this narrow passageway, Shea's knees were aching. He could not help but curse. What the hell? If this passageway is man-made, why didn't they make it wider? Hastings behind him was also crawling forward like Shea. Shea could not see Hastings' face, but he could hear his voice. He heard Hastings sneer. Because this passageway was not built for humans. What? Shea was stunned for a moment. He subconsciously turned back to ask something. However, when he turned back, his head bumped into a protruding underwater rock. Fortunately, he had been drenched in dragon's blood. Otherwise, his head would have been broken and bleeding. Even so, he was still dizzy from the collision. He held his head and said, "What did you say? Then what is this passageway for?" "It should be used to drain sewage." Hastings's voice was indifferent. "Don't stop. Keep moving forward. I have to warn you. Although your water avoidance pearl is not bad, any magical equipment cannot store unlimited magic power. Once the magic power of your water avoidance pearl is exhausted, it will no longer be able to support this waterless space. Think about it. If the two of us are in this passageway and the water avoidance pearl suddenly loses its effect, do you think we can escape in one breath?" Shea could not help but imagine the scene of drowning in this dark underground passageway. He immediately shuddered and increased his speed. However, his mouth was still stubborn. "Lao Tzu, what are you afraid of? You and I are both here. If I die, you will not be able to escape either. If the famous martial god Odin dies with Lao Tzu, I will not lose out." Hastings's sneering voice came from behind. "Don't worry. With my ability, even if your water avoidance pearl loses its effect, I will still have a way to get out alive. It is just a simple ability to control water. Do you think I can't do it? However, I will definitely be able to get out alive. If you drown here, I will be more than happy to oblige. In any case, you are the one who is wasting time. If you drown here, it will not be considered as me breaking my promise." Shea was speechless. After crawling for a full 4 hours, even though Shea's body was astonishingly tough, his physical strength was somewhat exhausted. Crawling in such a narrow place was the most physically exhausting. Moreover, Shea was already tired these past few days. In this place, the air was turbid. Gradually, it became difficult to breathe. But soon, Hastings' words seemed to be coming true. The radiance of the water avoidance pearl in his bosom gradually weakened. Clearly, the magic power had begun to decline. Moreover, Shea clearly felt that this waterless space was shrinking little by little along with the decline of the magic power. Originally, when the water avoidance pearl was filled with magic power, it could support a space that could accommodate over 10 people in Demandra's lair. But now, the space had shrunk by more than half. After crawling for nearly an hour, Shea suddenly felt the water in front of him shake. He could faintly see the end of the passageway. He immediately cheered, and a surge of energy surged out from his tired body. He increased his speed and desperately drilled forward. By the time he finally made it out of the passageway, the space within the water avoidance pearl had shrunk by quite a bit. At that moment, the waterless space was just barely big enough to accommodate Shea and Hastings. After crawling out of the passageway, they were still in the water. Shea desperately crawled upward. After a while, he suddenly emerged from the water surface. Instantly, he felt a wave of moist water hitting his face. Shea carefully inspected it. He could not help but become dumbfounded. This place appeared to be a pool of water. The passageway from earlier was beneath this pool of water. After emerging from the water surface, they found themselves in an underground cavern. This pool of water had a diameter of over 10 meters. It was actually a standard circular shape. With such a regular shape, Shea would not believe it even if he was beaten to death. Moreover, the edges of this pool of water were actually stacked up in a regular square shape, just like the edges of a water trough. It was hard and cold to the touch. Shea struggled to crawl out of the pool of water. He shouted loudly and flipped himself up. Then, he sprawled out on the surface of the pool and gasped for breath. I can't. Son of a bitch, Lao Tzu needs to sleep for 1 day and 1 night. Hastings, who was behind him, sneered. He rushed forward and stood beside Shea. He lowered his head to look at Shea and extended his leg to kick him. Get up, don't play dead. When we were training, I had already figured out your limit. You have yet to reach your limit. Shea gasped for breath for a moment before forcing himself to stand up. He glanced at Hastings and smiled wryly. We managed to crawl out, but this damned place, is it what you were looking for? Raising his head, he saw that there was only one pool of water in this dark underground cavern. The surrounding walls were smooth and glossy. However, for some unknown reason, when he breathed, he could feel a strange smell in the air. Even so, he did not feel uncomfortable. Clearly, there was an air vent here. Ca. A soft sound rang out and a clump of flame suddenly jumped out from Hastings's hand. The light from the flame suddenly illuminated the dark underground cavern. Shea turned to look at Hastings and found that this fellow was holding a small torch in his hand. The torch was made of metal and flames danced on its surface. How did he manage to hide such a thing on his body? Even after soaking in the water for so long, it did not get wet? Hastings glanced at Shea's face and guessed what was on Shea's mind. He smiled faintly and said, This is a torch made by the dwarves. The fuel inside it is specially made and is not afraid of being soaked by water. As long as there is air, it can be ignited. The craftsmanship of the dwarves. Shea shook his head. Hastings raised the torch and walked to the side of the cavern wall. Using the light from the torch, he began searching carefully. In less than a moment, Shea heard Hastings suddenly laughing out. Found it. It's here. I actually managed to find it. Looking at Hastings, who was standing beside the wall, his laughter faintly tinged with madness and his shoulders trembling nonstop, Shea suddenly felt a chill. He forced himself to walk to Hastings's side and looked at the wall in the direction that Hastings was pointing at. Shea was instantly dumbfounded. His face suddenly took on a marvelous expression. What was on the wall? It was a knob. Around the knob, there was a circle of fine scales. Above each scale there were fine, earthworm-like characters carved out. These words, Shea shouldn't be able to recognize any of them, but he actually recognized them. Fire moon. Star moon. Red moon, bloody hell. The same knob, the same scale, the same characters. These were goblin characters. Ancient goblin characters. This device was exactly the same as the ones he had seen in the underground lair of the ancient goblins, the creation god area, deep in the mountains of the Zaku tribe. In an instant, Shea understood. This damned man-made underground passage was actually also a relic of the ancient goblins? What are you looking for? Shea stared at Hastings. The light from the torch illuminated Hastings's originally old-fashioned face, giving it a strange appearance. He sneered and turned to look at Shea. If I were to say, I am looking for God, would you believe me? Requesting votes. Requesting recommendation votes. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 324. Geor Chapter 308 Hastings's Ambition. Do you believe it? Hearing Hastings's words, Shea suddenly felt an intense feeling of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Do I believe it? Do I believe it? Nonsense. If it were anyone else who heard Hastings's words, they would certainly not believe it. But Lao Tzu believes it. Seeing this place, seeing the remains of the ancient gnomes, he recalled the creation god area that nearly cost him his life. Then, he recalled the creation god project that the ancient gnomes came up with. Looking for God? Ha 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 ha. Lao Tzu believes it. Lao Tzu believes it. In that instant, Shea's expression became incomparably interesting. Perhaps he had been in a daze for too long. Seeing Shea's dumbfounded expression, Hastings misunderstood. He thought that his words had shocked Shea. Hastings did not know how much Shea knew about the ancient gnomes. Hastings took a deep breath and slapped Shea's shoulder. He smiled faintly and said, "What is it? Are you dumbfounded? Or do you think I am spouting nonsense because I have lost my mind? Let me tell you, I am looking for God. This God is not empty talk, nor is it some spiritual idol. It is a real God. A true God that still exists in this mortal world." Pausing, he looked into Shea's eyes. There was a look of pity in his eyes. He probably thought that his words had scared Shea silly. Hastings even displayed a rare display of patience, and his tone softened. He said, "I believe you are still confused. However, you will know once I tell you." Shea could feel the corners of his mouth twitching. "Tell me and I will know?" Ha ha. What a joke. Lao Tzu already knows. Furthermore, I'm afraid he knows a lot more than you. Shea, who was gradually coming back to his senses, had a thought. He continued to pretend to be shocked and stared at Hastings with his eyes wide open. Actually, the history of this place is too complicated. If you want to talk about it, you have to start from tens of thousands of years ago. Then, Hastings slowly explained some of the matters regarding the ancient gnomes in a brief manner. He was very brief, but the description of the ancient gnomes was mostly similar to the diary of the gnome that Shea had read. How is it? Are you surprised? You can't imagine that those filthy, lowly, and stupid goblins were the rulers of this world in ancient times. They were the smartest, wisest, and most powerful race. Hastings gave a wry smile. When I first found out about this, I was also very surprised. My expression was similar to yours now. With Hastings's shrewdness, even if Shea tried to hide his expression, he would still be able to tell that something was wrong. But at this moment, Hastings was excited. His long-cherished wish was about to be fulfilled. He had finally found the place that he had always dreamed of. Under the surge of emotions, his vigilance inevitably weakened a little. "What you just said is really amazing," Shea deliberately said in a low voice. "But these things, how did you know?" Hastings snorted, looked at Shea, and replied. But this sentence almost made Shea's nose crooked out of anger. "I'm not telling you." Hastings seemed to just turn the knob on the wall casually, and turned it to a scale. His movements seemed casual, but Shea saw something unusual in Hastings's relaxed movements. This guy, he seemed to be able to read the ancient goblin's language? "You recognize the symbols on this?" Shea pretended to be at a loss. "The ancient goblin's language," Hastings said coldly. "I've learned some, and I can just barely understand it. Damn, these ancient goblins are probably more than 10,000 years old. Where did you learn these skills?" Shea did not pretend to be stupid this time, but was really puzzled. Hastings glanced at Shea, but suddenly frowned. He didn't teach you this? This sentence immediately caused Shea's heart to violently tremble. He. The he that Hastings mentioned, other than that evil old guy, who else could it be? The old guy is smiling in the underworld, for the nth time. Shea was upset. Very, very upset. This old guy actually knew the ancient goblin's language? Then there was no need to ask. Hastings must have known about the ancient goblins from the old guy. This old guy. He was simply favoring one and discriminating against the other. Such precious information, and he told Hastings, but didn't tell his adopted son? However, Shea did not have time to be angry. As Hastings turned the knob on the wall of the cave suddenly emitted a caw-caw sound. Soon, the originally intact wall in front of him was separated into a gap. As the wall separated to the left and right, a room appeared in front of them. This again, Shea lamented in his heart. This goblin's construction was so strange. After entering this room this time, he did not know where Lao Tzu would be sent to when the door opened. After Hastings walked in first, Shea naturally followed behind. As the wall slowly closed, after a moment, the slight tinnitus feeling appeared again. Then, after a sudden pause, the wall slowly separated. Let's go. I think you are as excited as I am to see what it is like inside. Hastings strode out. Shea was full of worries, but when he followed out, he could not help but be stunned. After walking out of this small room, there was a much larger cave outside. This cave was still circular like a huge round jar. But this time, when they walked out, they saw a huge circular turntable in the middle of the cave. This turntable was like a knob that had been enlarged countless times. The base of the turntable still had a circle of scales and different goblin characters. However, this circular cave was not surrounded by walls, but several doors. Shea could tell at a glance that these doors were undoubtedly made of iron essence. What is this place? Shea frowned. Storage room. Hastings pointed at the surrounding doors. There are words on them. This is the storage room for the experimental result. Experimental results. Storage room? Shea's heart skipped a beat. Storage room, then, what is stored here is the result of the goblin's creation god. Don't worry, God will not stay in a storage room. Hastings smiled faintly. The creation god project of the ancient goblins was extremely large. It was such a huge plan. While creating the gods, it naturally gave rise to many additional results. For example, there are all kinds of powerful weapons, super strengthening of living creatures, and even some extremely powerful technology. Shea's heart began to beat wildly. Hastings strode to the huge turntable in the middle and looked at the scales and words on it. He frowned and said, "The words on this are very clear. This is a type of enhancement for living creatures. It is not what I am looking for." After saying that, he seemed to have lost interest and began to walk to the wall to look for the knobs that led to other places. However, Shea had already run to the side of the huge turntable in the middle. Driven by curiosity, he tried to push the turntable and pushed it to the first scale. Hastings heard Shea's movements. He turned around to look at him and did not say anything. It was as though he had no interest in this. After the turntable was pushed, caw-caw sounds could be heard and one of the surrounding doors slowly rose up, revealing a room inside. Shea let go of the turntable and walked to the door of the room. However, he hesitated for a moment and did not dare to rashly enter. After his previous experience, he did not dare to casually walk into these goblin-made rooms. Heaven knows where he would be sent to if he were to be teleported to. Go on in. These are storage rooms, not teleportation rooms, Hastings said coolly. If you are interested in these things, feel free to look around. Shea hesitated for a moment. However, considering that Hastings would not harm him, his heart relaxed and he walked in. The room wasn't big, only about 5 or 6 meters wide. There were 3 rows of metal shelves arranged in the room, just like bookshelves. On the shelves there were some transparent glass-like jars covering them. Inside each jar there was something similar to a small bowl. In those bowls there were round things the size of a thumb. "These are mussel fruits." Hastings's voice suddenly rang out from behind Shea. It turned out he had instantly arrived beside Shea. "Son of a bitch! Walking without making any sound in this damned place will scare me to death," Shea scolded. "Then," he continued, "what did you say just now? Mussel fruit? What is that?" Hastings frowned and pondered for a moment. Then, he looked at the transparent jars on the shelves and slowly said, according to what I know, this mussel fruit should be a product created by the ancient goblins. They borrowed the plant-type magic of the elves and added their own research into it. It is said that there are also some legendary magic transformations from the demon race. In the end, they created this thing. However, this thing does not have much use. Then, what is its use? Shea was unwilling to give up so easily. Hastings sighed and said, "Mussel fruit should be able to be planted on the body of a living creature. After fusing with the host, it can strengthen the host's fleshly body. Simply put, it is to increase the strength and toughness of the muscles. Additionally, due to the addition of a type of berserk magic, once the host is injured, the severity of the injury will increase. The host will become stronger in battle. The strength and toughness of the muscles will also increase with the injury. After reaching a certain level of strength, the degree of resistance and damage will also increase." Son of a bitch! Won't that make the host invincible? Shea could not help but exhale. The more the host fights, the stronger the host gets. Of course not. Hastings shook his head and said, "There is a limit to the strength of the host. If the limit is exceeded, the host's fleshly body will collapse. Once the fleshly body collapses, just imagine a living person suddenly melting like ice." Shea's heart skipped a beat and his face changed. Hastings looked at Shea and said seriously, "This kind of thing is not the right path. There is a limit to the strengthening of the fleshly body. Moreover, the cultivation of martial arts lies in the comprehension of the realm. Blindly strengthening the fleshly body, even if the body becomes harder than steel, you are just a target for others to hit. Among all the races, the fleshly body of the dragon race is the strongest. So what? I advise you to put your mind on the right path. Don't always think about taking advantage of the situation. Work hard to improve your cultivation is the right thing to do." Hearing that, Shea nodded his head casually. Actually, Hastings did not understand. Shea did not want to plant these mussel fruits for him. Instead, Lao Tzu himself cannot use them. But if he brings them back, he can give them to the people around him. His subordinates weren't that strong at the moment, but if he had this kind of mussel fruit, others aside, Sharba is a big brat. He is a heavy cavalry and likes to use heavy weapons. If he gives Sharba this mussel fruit in any case, Shea did not expect to cultivate an invincible expert. However, it can greatly increase his strength in a short period of time. Just think about it. After using these mussel fruits, that fellow who was born with a tiger's back and a bear's waist would become as hard as steel and possess boundless strength. Even if he does not exchange blows with any experts, he would still become a fearsome general on the battlefield. After saying that, Shea walked over and lifted the transparent cover. He then placed the mussel fruits one by one into his cloth pouch. Hastings watched from the side and sighed. I have already said it. You still want to take advantage of the situation. In the future, you can't blame others. Shea collected all the 40-plus mussel fruits stored in the room into his pouch. Then, he ran to the disc in the middle. He was greedy and turned the disc to the next scale. Along with a caw-caw sound, a door beside the storage room of the mussel fruits slowly opened. This time, it was still a small room. There were still several rows of shelves in the room. On top of the shelves were some transparent jars covering some utensils. However, the things inside the jars were round balls the size of a fist. They were pitch black. They looked similar to the mussel fruits, only slightly bigger. "What is this?" Shea turned around and asked Hastings. Hastings walked over and looked at the shelf. Beside the shelves was a metal plate with goblin characters engraved on it. "War Tree Fortress." Hastings's voice was filled with disdain. "It is still borrowing from the civilization of the elves." "Humph! Once these seeds are planted in the soil, they will quickly grow into giant trees. They are as strong as metal. Additionally, the branches, leaves and vines can automatically attack approaching enemies." "Humph! Useless trash." He suddenly turned around and saw Shea's eyes shining. Hastings immediately understood and sneered. "Ah, I know. You are not coveting these things for your own use. You want to bring them back and arm your subordinates?" Then, he shook his head. "If that is the case, then those mussel fruits may be useful. However, this War Tree Fortress is a standard trash. I am afraid you will be disappointed." "Why?" Hastings pointed at the metal plate and sneered. "It is clearly written on it. This technology is flawed. Once the War Tree Fortress grows, it will automatically attack the enemy. However, the goblins have a flaw that has not been overcome. That is, how to judge the enemy. In other words, this War Tree Fortress will automatically attack any creature that approaches it, regardless of friend or foe. What is the use of that? Humph! Moreover, once this thing is planted, it cannot be moved. In battle, the enemy can easily avoid it, and it will not be of any use." After hearing this, Shea did not care. He swept everything clean and put them all into his bag. These seeds were much bigger than the mussel fruit. At this moment, Shea's bag became bigger. He could no longer put them in his arms, and could only carry them on his back. Looking at Hastings's disapproving expression, Shea thought to himself, "Humph! You say these things are useless? In my opinion, they are very useful. So what if they can attack indiscriminately? So what if they cannot be moved after being planted? Could it be that it was useless? Lao Tzu will find an opportunity to run to Odin, to the capital of your Odin Empire. He will find a place in the city and plant 17 or 18 seed. No one will know. By the time these war trees grow, Lao Tzu will have already run away. Humph! Humph! With such a large number of strange trees attacking people in Odin Empire, the people of Odin Empire will be able to have a taste of their own medicine." While Shea was thinking this, Hastings said coldly, "Do you think I can't guess what you are thinking? These things may not be of much use in battle. However, it is not bad to use them to destroy the enemy." "Humph! You are thinking of using them in Odin Empire, aren't you?" Shea was seen through, but he did not hide it. "So what?" Hastings shook his head. "I don't care about that. I am not one of Odin Empire's people. I have given myself to Odin Empire just to use Odin Empire's power for revenge. As long as I succeed in my revenge, I don't care about Odin Empire or Byzantium Empire." After a pause, his eyes revealed a trace of fanaticism. "Even if you want to use this thing against me, so what? Humph! As long as I find what I am looking for here, in the future, there will be nothing in this world that can make me afraid." Shea tied the bundle securely and looked at Hastings's fanaticism. "What are you looking for? That god created by the goblins? What is the use of finding it? Do you want it to help you take revenge?" Hastings snorted. "Simple-minded guy." He looked at Shea and sneered. "Don't forget, this god was created. That is to say, the ancient goblins invented a technology that can create gods. It is said that it is a complicated and huge equipment that can fuse all the powerful factors of many races into one individual, thus creating a powerful god. What I am looking for is not that god, but—" Shea's face suddenly changed. He stared at Hastings and blurted out, "Ah, I understand. You want to find the ancient goblins' technology that can create gods. Then you want to create yourself into a god. It's not easy to be able to keep up with the updates in a foreign land. Everyone, please help me and vote, recommendation votes, monthly votes, anything is fine. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com, support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 325. Gior Chapter 309. You reap what you sow. God? This fellow wants to become a god? Shea looked at Hastings, who was standing before him. After a moment, he exhaled deeply. There was a peculiar look in his eyes as he said, "Why, the fellows I meet are all crazier than the last." God? Hastings's face remained unchanged. He casually looked around and said coldly, "Is it crazy? If so, what about the ancient gnomes who claim to want to create a god?" Shea was speechless. After a while, he slapped his head and glanced at Hastings. There was no telling what he was thinking, but he laughed out loudly and said, "Forget it. What does it have to do with Lao Tzu? Whether you want to become a god or something else, whether you succeed or fail, it has nothing to do with me." After saying that, he actually ran out in big strides and ran to the turntable in the middle to look carefully. He then began to spin the turntable in high spirit. Hastings looked at the country bumpkin's simple-minded expression, and a peculiar look appeared on his face. He frowned and said, "Do you really think this has nothing to do with you? What could it have to do with me?" Shea hugged the turntable and spun it vigorously. Then, he turned around and stared at Hastings. "After becoming a god, you will become even more powerful. Just go find the imperial family for revenge. If you fail, you will still be Hastings, no matter what. Lao Tzu is no match for you. Is there a difference if you are twice as strong as me, or 100 times stronger than me?" Hearing that, Hastings broke into a smile and said, "Not bad, not bad. Kid, you sure are open-minded." Shea shook his head and said, "I don't care about those gods or demons. There are so many good things here. I will think of a way to take some of them first. Getting some benefits is the most important thing." As he spoke, the turntable spun, and the third gate slowly opened. After the third door, the room inside was much bigger and deeper than the previous two. Strangely enough, the walls of this room were not square. Instead, they were hexagonal, just like a beehive. Shea stood outside and looked inside. He couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. In this grotesquely shaped room, there was a pile of oval-shaped objects. It looked like egg. Shea immediately ran in, stretched out his arms, and picked up a huge egg that was at least a meter tall. However, when he held it in his hands, he realized that this thing was very light. Only then did he realize that these eggs were empty. Only the shell was left intact, but there was a small gap at the top of the eggshell. Obviously, the thing that was originally inside the egg was long gone. "What the hell is this?" Shea looked at the empty eggshell in his hand and frowned. "It's so big. Could it be a dragon egg?" Hastings shook his head and sneered. "Dragon egg? A real dragon egg is at least twice as big as this." Shea thought for a moment and his heart skipped a beat. He recalled the snake eggs in Demandra's snake cave. They were about the same size as the eggs here. Could it be snake eggs? Hastings had already walked to Shea's side. His eyes fell on the wall. There was a metal plate on the wall. There were some ancient gnome characters on it. "These should be failed products," Hastings slowly said. "In order to create God, the ancient gnomes seem to have tried to breed many creatures. These should be their handiwork." As he said that, he pointed to the wall and smiled bitterly. "The structure of these eggs is recorded here. They were bred from a mixture of several different creatures. However, they all failed and the bred creatures died very quickly. The embryos were all taken out. However, these eggshells were considered valuable research materials and were preserved here." Shea immediately lost interest. "A pile of broken eggshells, what use can they be?" As he said that, he threw the empty eggshell on the ground. When the eggshell fell to the ground, it made a muffled sound. Shea was startled by the sound. He looked at the eggshell on the ground and his heart skipped a beat. He bent down and picked it up. After carefully examining it for a moment, he suddenly smiled and said, "Ah, this thing is not a waste. This eggshell looks very strong. It has been here for so long and it is still intact. Just now, when I threw it on the ground, it did not break." After saying that, he used a knife to stab it twice. Sure enough, the eggshell was much harder than metal. When the knife stabbed it, sparks flew out. However, it was not damaged in the slightest. "Good stuff." Shea laughed. He looked at the eggshell and scratched his head. "This thing is big and spacious. Although it is not bad, I only have 2 hands. How many can I carry?" Thinking of this, Shea suddenly woke up and remembered something. He suddenly shouted, "Ah! Not good. This is bad." He saw that the eggshell was too big and difficult to carry. However, he suddenly thought of a very important problem. At present, he still had a bag stuffed with mussel fruits and the seeds of the War Tree Fortress. The bag was piled up like a small mountain on his back. When it was time to leave, do not forget, when he entered, the entrance was a narrow underwater waterway. The waterway could barely allow a person to crawl through. Along the way, it was inevitable that he would bump into something. However, with such a big bag on his back, how was he going to crawl through the waterway? More importantly, Shea recalled something that caused his face to change color. The reason why he was able to enter smoothly was because he had the water prevention bead in his hand. Along the way, he had to open up the water in the waterway to calmly crawl over. The waterway was very long and Shea had to crawl for a few hours. If he had to rely on swimming or diving, he would have suffocated to death. However, the problem was that the magic power of the water prevention bead was almost exhausted. When he returned, he would not be able to support himself until he crawled out. At most, he would only be able to crawl a quarter of the way. Once the magic power was exhausted, he would be stuck under the long waterway and would have to crawl underwater for a few hours. Shea knew that he did not have the ability to not breathe for a few hours. After suddenly realizing this, how could Shea's face not change color? Just as Shea's face turned pale, Hastings coldly looked at Shea and said, "Have you thought it through?" Hearing those words, Shea suddenly became angry and said, "Aha! You have already thought of it. Once I enter, I will not be able to get out. So, you are naturally happy that I am trapped in this damned place without seeing the light of day, aren't you?" Hastings stared at Shea and said coldly, "You are the one who is stupid with your intelligence. If you had not been tempted by the things left behind by the goblins, how could you have only thought of this problem now?" Shea was speechless. Just now, he had indeed been too excited and only thought of plundering some benefits. Enough. Hastings said indifferently, "If I wanted your life, I would not use such a despicable method to harm you. Humph, you should use your brain and think about it. The waterway we came in was not meant for humans to pass through. Since this place was built by the goblins, there must be a passageway for the goblins to enter and exit. As long as we find the passageway, we will not have to crawl through the waterhole." Shea was stunned for a moment. Then, he slapped his head and ran over to continue pushing the turntable in the middle. "Humph, now you are not afraid of not being able to get out?" Hastings stood there and watched coldly. Shea's face remained calm and he said, "At any rate, it is that simple. Whether or not we can get out, we will talk about it later. Right now, there are many good things here. If we don't check them out, how can we be satisfied? Let's see if there are any good things and bring them with us first. Once we find the exit, we will move out. If we don't check them out now, are we going to wait until we find the exit and come back?" Hastings harumphed and said, "I don't know how teacher taught you to have such a greedy character." Shea was not angry. After pushing the turntable, he pointed at the open fourth door and said, Help me check what is inside first. Inside the fourth door was a round-shaped box. The box was about 1 meter tall. Shea touched the bottom for a moment and a caw sound was heard. The circular gears on both sides of the box began to turn automatically. Then, with a pa-ta sound, the box opened up. Just as the box opened up a small gap, a white-colored mist suddenly emerged from the inside. Shea's hand was close to the box, and when the mist hit him, he shrunk his hand back and said, "So cold." After a large amount of cold mist emerged from the box, the mist contained an intense chill. As soon as it spread out, the temperature of the entire room dropped significantly. Shea was surprised in his heart. How could there be so much extremely cold gas stored in this box? How did it store this cold air for so long? Out of curiosity, Chen Xiaoyan waited for the cold air to dissipate before he dared to put his hand inside. Even though he was mentally prepared, he could not stop himself from shivering. "It is so cold inside." Shea retracted his hand and used a knife to pry open the lid of the box. When he looked inside, he was stunned. This is a jewelry box? Inside the box, there were rows and rows of small compartments. Inside these compartments were rings. That's right, rings. There were at least hundreds of compartments in the box. However, not every compartment contained a ring. Shea gave it a quick glance and saw that there were only 30 to 40 rings. The strangest thing was that these rings, or objects that were shaped like rings, ordinary rings, were inlaid with either gems or crystals. But these things were inlaid on the ring, and they looked very strange. For example, there were some black, stone-like particles. There were also some round fruits. That's right, they seemed to be the fruits of some kind of plant. Shea even saw a large ring inlaid with a round object. It was no different from a grape. What are these things? Shea smiled bitterly. Hastings's expression turned serious. He squatted down and touched the box. Finally, he saw a few lines of text on the lid of the box. This is a storage box that stores a variety of miscellaneous experimental results that are not easy to categorize. Hastings said, "The ancient gnomes should have borrowed a large amount of natural plant magic from the elves to create this equipment. It seems that they can already use natural plant magic to replace the traditional magic gems and magic crystals with the fruits of magic plants. This is really amazing." Looking at Shea's shocked expression, Hastings frowned and said, "Even if you don't understand magic, you should be able to understand the benefits of this, right? Let's not talk about the effects of these fruit. If the effects of these fruits are comparable to ordinary magic gems or magic crystals, or even half the power, then this technology will be very useful. Then, this technology is already very, very impressive." "Why, idiot!" Hastings seemed to be somewhat impatient. "Magic crystals and magic gems are rare things. Moreover, the mines that produce magic gems and crystals are becoming rarer and more precious. To form a natural magic crystal vein was a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity. For this kind of thing, the more it is mined, the less it will be. Moreover, the price and cost are extremely high. But, if we can use the fruits of these magic plants to replace them, then the benefits will naturally be great. In the future, there will be no need to look for magic crystal mines all over the world. There will be no need to spend an astronomical amount of manpower and resources to mine them. Everyone just needs to plant these magic plants and wait for the trees to grow fruit. Wouldn't it be much easier? Planting trees is much simpler than mining, right? Moreover, planting trees can be repeated and popularized on a large scale. As long as there are seeds, there will be more seeds. These advantages can't be satisfied with just ores." Actually, Shea had already understood these principles when Hastings hadn't finished his first sentence. But he deliberately pretended to be ignorant and even widened his eyes, letting Hastings reprimand him. But he didn't bat an eyelid and only moved the box out of the room bit by bit. Then he ran to continue spinning the turntable in the middle. But then, Shea's luck seemed to have run out. He opened the doors of 3 more rooms, and they were all empty. There was nothing inside. It was clear that the things inside had already been moved elsewhere by the goblins. When the last door was opened, standing outside, it was empty. It was clear at a glance. Shea sighed. "Ai, it seems like there is nothing else." After saying this, he walked into the room and carefully looked at the empty walls for a while. Suddenly, he heard Shea's tone change as he exclaimed, There is something on the wall." After saying this, he turned around and called Hastings. "Hey! Quickly come and see. There are patterns on the wall. Come and see if they were left behind by the goblins." Hastings's face was indifferent as he walked into the room. His eyes swept over the wall, but he didn't see any patterns. He frowned and said, "Where is the thing you are talking about?" Shea didn't bat an eyelid, but he deliberately scratched his head. His feet quietly stepped back and he loudly said, "It is here." "Can't you see it? Why am I able to see it? Could it be that there is something strange about this pattern? Is it one of those dark patterns that can only be seen when looking at it from the side?" Hastings did not have any doubts in his heart. He took a few more steps forward and stood at a corner with the wall. However, he was still unable to see anything. He frowned and said, "The thing you are talking about." But before he could finish his sentence, Shea had already quietly retreated to the outside of the room's sluice gate without revealing his true intentions. He suddenly reached out with his hand and swiped the wall outside. Shea had deliberately dawdled for a long time, looking through the rooms one by one. However, he had secretly observed some of the details. In these rooms there was a small circular knob on the wall outside of each door. Shea calculated and guessed that this should be the switch for the door to fall down. He quickly turned the knob outside and with a boom, the door above his head fell down. Suddenly, a loud sound rang out and the room was completely sealed. Hastings was naturally locked inside the door as well. These doors were made of iron essence. Back then, Shea was unable to cut them open even with the flaming fork in his hand. When he saw Hastings and himself enter, he did not bring the sharp triangular spear with him. He probably left it at the top of the well for the sake of convenience. He did not expect this door to be able to lock Hastings up, however. By delaying this old man for a moment, he might have a chance to escape. Seeing that Hastings had fallen for his trick and the door had fallen, Shea immediately cheered and laughed. He turned around and ran to the side. He picked up the large pile of items that he had collected and ran toward the other side of the cave. "Old black brat, it doesn't matter if you want to become a god or a ghost. Lao Tzu will not accompany you." Suddenly, a loud sound rang out from the door that Hastings had been locked in. With a loud bang, the entire cave seemed to shake violently. On the originally smooth door made of iron essence, thin cracks like spider webs appeared. Shea saw it clearly and his heart jumped. "Oh my God! This Hastings is indeed powerful. It seems that this iron essence door will not be able to stop him for long. I have to get out of here as soon as possible." As he spoke, he had already rushed to the wall of the cave. On the wall was the entrance to the room that could be raised. As for the knob on the wall, although it was in the gnome language, it was not difficult for Shea to read. Don't forget, in the mind of this country bumpkin, there was still Dora who could read the gnome language. When Hastings came in, he turned the first knob. There are still 3 more knobs, which should lead to the deeper 3 levels. How do we go? Do we return to where we came in or continue going down? Shea pursed his lips. Of course we go down. If we want to go out from the place we came in, we have to go through the water channel. The magic power of the water avoidance pearl is not enough. I don't have the ability to not breathe for several hours. If we want to find other exits, we can only go deeper. As he spoke, Shea turned the knob to the lowest knob. After the door opened, he rushed in. When the door of the room slowly closed, a loud bang could be heard from outside. The door that locked Hastings was shattered into pieces. A black figure rushed out from inside. Hastings had actually broken through the door so quickly. Fortunately, the door was already closed. Shea felt the ringing in his ears again. A moment later, the door of the room opened and he looked outside. Sure enough, it was another unfamiliar large cave. When Shea walked out of the room, he suddenly took out the fire fork and slashed at the knob on the wall. With a few cautious sounds, the sharp fire fork penetrated through the wall. Shea clearly felt that the fire fork seemed to have cut off a few things. Then the door of the room opened and closed twice, but in the end, it couldn't be closed again. Shea was sure that he had broken the control switch. Only then did he feel relieved. He smiled and said, "Okay. This time, even if Hastings wants to chase after us, there is no way. He can't just dig a hole and chase after us. If he still has the ability to dig holes, Lao Tzu will not call him old brat in the future. I will call him Black Rat." Shea looked into the cave a few times. Suddenly, a strange feeling arose in his heart. This cave was a huge, circular shape. It was round in shape, but the surface area was very wide. At first glance, it was empty. There was nothing in it at all. However, on the walls of this circular cave, there were thousands of holes. There were thousands of holes. These holes were of various sizes, and they looked like eyes that were densely packed together on the wall. Shea only felt that there was an indescribable strangeness here. While he was hesitating, he suddenly heard a walala walala sound. It was like a tide. Listening carefully, the sound of the tide was coming from all directions, from the dense holes in the walls. When Shea heard this sound, his face immediately changed. He said, "There is something inside. This sound, it seems to be." Finally, Shea's face suddenly changed. That was because he had already seen the little things crawling out of the hole in the wall closest to him. Metal-devouring ants. Damn it! Shea was scared out of his wits. He turned around and wanted to run, but where was the exit from this cave? The only way out was the room behind him that could teleport up and down. Shea rushed in, but suddenly stamped his feet and fiercely slapped himself in the face. Damn it! This time I've killed myself. Lao Tzu personally broke the switch. This time I can't run anymore. I dug my own hole and buried myself. This is called King reaping what you sow. Shea looked at the dense swarm of ants flowing down the wall like a tide. His mouth was wide open and his heart was bitter. Metal-devouring ants. Damn it! How could there be such terrifying things in this place? I just came back from Shanghai this afternoon to participate in the CJ Expo. It was so lively. Countless beauties, countless players, and countless media. These 2 days I've been tired to death. However, I'm still very happy seeing so many beautiful booth girls on the Hunting Nations booth and the professional cosplayers who were hired to dress up as Hunting Nations characters. __ also, I want to announce that my work on the game has temporarily come to an end. I'll increase the number of updates. August battle? To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 326. Haha, I wrote an alarmist title. Actually, I feel like I've been lazy for too long. It's been a long time since I started a chapter to solicit vote. In August, I plan to pull myself together and increase the speed of my chapters. I hope everyone can support me. The 2nd day of August is my birthday. According to Nanjing's nominal year system, it's 30 years old? No. I won't admit it. I'm 29. 29. 29. Haha, birthday presents. I heard that everyone has organized a lot of activities to get monthly vote. There's even a reward program. I'm very grateful, but I don't want everyone to spend so much money. For things like monthly votes, if you have them, just vote for them. If you don't, then there's no need to spend money to buy them. As for rewards, about that, to be honest, if you really want to reward me on the second day of August, just casually give me $1 as a red packet for little Five's birthday. Haha, I won't ask for anything more. Money doesn't grow on trees. I'm already very grateful that you're willing to subscribe to my book. Finally, I want to say, in August I'll pull myself together. I'll fight. Yes, I'll fight in August. I'll work hard to increase the speed of my chapters. I'll definitely make everyone satisfied, so I'll have to rely on everyone's support. The more the better. As for monthly votes, it'll be best if you can get them. If you can't, then a subscription is enough. That's how it is. In the end, this can be considered a single chapter to solicit vote. I hope that after 12 o'clock, everyone will be able to vote for me. To be continued. If you want to know what's to come, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 327. The first day of the month, begging for monthly votes. Chapter 310. Hypocrite. A series of rapid coughs came from the room. The sound was like a torn bellows, filled with a sense of fragility and weakness. Standing outside the room, several palace attendants wearing linen robes lowered their heads nervously, appearing to be very frightened. In the corridor, only the palace warriors wearing golden armor were still holding their heads high. The sound of hurried footsteps could be heard from the corridor. A palace physician in white ran over under the lead of a servant. A moment later, a priest and a mage from the church rushed over as well. In this huge palace, all the candlelight from the arm-thick candlesticks seemed to be concentrated on the huge bed in the middle of the room. On the luxurious bed, the base of the bed was made with jewels and gold. On the soft mattress that was as thick as the clouds, the noblest old man in the empire was gasping for breath. Behind the thick curtains, his figure was somewhat blurred. On the high pillars of the bed, there were some strange symbols engraved on them. Emperor Cantos's face was as pale as a dead man's. His cheeks were deeply sunken, and there was a strange green color to his pale face. He appeared to be even thinner. His body was covered in a luxurious robe, but the wrist that was exposed from the sleeves was like a skeleton. All that was left of his originally majestic body was his skeleton. The emperor's face was filled with pain. It seemed that every breath he took was a great burden to him. The intense pain tortured his body. Light candles, candles. The emperor struggled to spit out the words from his mouth. All of them, light them up. All of them. After he shouted with all his might, he muttered to himself in a low voice. It's too dark here, too dark, like a damned tomb, too dark. A few of his personal attendants quickly found candles and lit them on the surrounding tables. Dozens of huge candles lit up the room, but the emperor still seemed to be dissatisfied. He continued to shake his head and muttered. Too dark, like a tomb. Finally, almost 100 candles were lit. The flickering of the candles brought light, but at the same time, it seemed to be unable to disperse the gloomy and cold smell in the room. The palace doctor first walked to the emperor's side. He carefully helped the emperor to lie down, then quickly undid the emperor's robe. He reached out and pressed the emperor's skinny chest a few times, then carefully grabbed the emperor's wrist and neck. He checked the frequency of the emperor's heartbeat, then opened the emperor's eyelids. Finally, he took out a thin needle from his sleeve and gently pierced it into the emperor's chest. A drop of blood seeped out. The medical officer quickly threw the needle with the blood bead into a transparent bottle. The bottle was originally filled with a transparent liquid, but when the blood bead entered the bottle, the originally pure and transparent liquid suddenly rippled and quickly turned into a faint blue color. The doctor's face became extremely unsightly. He looked at the emperor lying on the soft couch and hesitated for a moment. His lips moved as if he didn't know what to say. At this time, the magician and the priest finally arrived. When the palace magician wearing a red robe entered, all the servants in the room let out a sigh of relief. It was obvious that this palace magician was the one they trusted. The palace magician quickly walked to the emperor's side. He quickly glanced at the emperor, then took out a small wooden box from his sleeve. He opened the box and used 2 fingers to gently pinch out a dark green leaf. This leaf was so green and tender, sparkling and translucent. It was thin and long, and looked as if it was full of vitality. The magician's face was calm. He pinched the leaf and brought it to the emperor's mouth. He gently pinched the emperor's chin and helped Emperor Cantos open his mouth. Only then did he put the leaf into the emperor's mouth. The leaf spread on the emperor's tongue. Soon, a sizzling sound was heard, and a light mist was emitted from the emperor's mouth. It was as if the leaf was quickly melting. The emperor was sent to lie down, and that sizzling sound was still coming from his mouth. Finally, a ball of faintly flowing light quickly emerged from the emperor's face. Then, it quickly flowed through his entire body. A miracle happened. His originally withered and sunken cheeks had miraculously filled up with muscles. His originally ashen complexion, like that of a dead person, had regained its rosy color. The laborious panting that sounded like a broken bellows finally calmed down. The heart-wrenching coughs also finally subsided. The emperor finally opened his eyes, and there was a trace of relief in his eyes. He looked at the palace magician beside him and sighed softly. "Thank you, Sir Iper. You can always save me from trouble." The palace magician didn't say anything to the emperor, but turned to look at the priest behind him and nodded. The priest walked over and bowed to the emperor, then slowly said, "Your Majesty, please lie down and let me start casting the spell for you." With that, the priest took out a small bottle from his arms and gently poured out some holy water. He picked up a few drops and sprinkled it on the emperor's forehead. He was about to chant a spell loudly. Wait a minute. The palace doctor's face finally changed. He strode forward and grabbed the priest's sleeve. "Wait a minute." The palace doctor looked anxious. "No. You can't do this anymore." The emperor opened his eyes and looked at the palace doctor. He frowned and asked, "What's wrong?" The doctor looked hesitant, but in an instant, as if he had made a decision, he raised his head and looked directly into the emperor's eyes. He said loudly, "Your Majesty, you can't use magic to treat yourself anymore. This method isn't helping you recover, but it's harming you." The emperor frowned and his face sank. "Idiot, get out of my way." The palace magician smiled coldly and waved his sleeve lightly. Immediately, the body of the palace doctor fell back. When he landed on the ground, 2 servants quickly came forward to help him up. "Idiot? You're the idiot." The palace doctor's face was filled with determination. After breaking free from the support of the palace servants, he struggled to stand up and pointed at the palace magician. "This is murder. This is murder against His Majesty. You can't continue like this." When the word murder came out of the doctor's mouth, suddenly, the silhouettes of a few palace warriors appeared in the corner of the room. The silent middle-aged man also appeared in the corner like a shadow. The palace doctor gritted his teeth, took off the hat on his head, and threw it on the ground. Then, he plopped down on his knees and said loudly to Emperor Cantos, "Your Majesty, this can't continue like this. These damned swindlers, they're all deceiving you." As he spoke, he raised his bottle up high. "Do you see the color of the water in this bottle? Once your blood touches it, it will turn blue. This means that you've been poisoned very deeply." "Nonsense." The palace magician shook his head and stared at the doctor with a sneer. "You useless people can't cure His Majesty's illness. But the radiance of magic can dispel His Majesty's illness. Your ignorant mind can't understand the mystery of magic, yet you use such hateful words to insult. I really don't understand magic." The doctor stubbornly raised his head and stared at the magician, saying loudly, "Perhaps? In the eyes of a noble magician like you, a person like me is indeed an insignificant existence. You only need to flick your finger, and you can easily take away my lowly life. But I'm a doctor. Although I don't understand magic, I do understand the human body. I know medicine. I admit the greatness and mystery of magic. But magic is not omnipotent. It can't solve all problems." His head was full of sweat. He used his knees to move forward and kneeled in front of the bed. Facing Emperor Cantos on the bed, he said loudly, "Your Majesty, I'm incompetent. Facing your serious illness, I can't use my medical skills to help you get rid of your illness. But this isn't because my medical skills are incompetent. Rather, there's nothing in this world that can solve all problems. Your illness can't be solved by medical skills, but similarly, magic can't solve it either." "Can't be solved?" The palace magician sneered. "If you're not blind, you should be able to see that His Majesty's complexion is much better now." "Indeed," the doctor said loudly. "That's right. But this is a kind of deception. It's a kind of murder." He took out a book from his bosom and said loudly, "Your Majesty, as your medical officer, it's my duty to record your condition. From the first time this noble magician treated you, I've recorded everything that happened after that. A few months ago, when he used magic to dispel your illness for the first time, the effects of the treatment lasted for half a month before your illness relapsed. But then, the second treatment only lasted for 10 days. The third treatment only lasted for 7 days. The fourth treatment lasted for 4 days. Until today, you have to undergo treatment almost every day. Every time the effect of the treatment, the duration of the treatment is getting shorter and shorter. But this magician gave you that magical leaf, the dosage is getting bigger and bigger. I remember that during the first treatment, he only gave you a quarter of the leaf. But today, even if you take an entire leaf, it can only stop your illness for less than a day." He threw the book on the ground and pointed at the priest beside him. He said loudly, "Even the most ordinary person knows one thing. Healing spells can't be used more than once, because healing spells aren't really used to heal the damage done to the body. Actually, it's only used to stimulate the body's functions to quickly grow and recover. But this kind of spell, if used too much, it's actually harmful to the body. Instead, it will consume a large amount of the person's vitality. Such a simple principle, not to mention this noble magician, even a magic apprentice should know this common sense. But this magician allows the priest to use healing spells on you every time. Isn't this murder?" Emperor Cantos sat on the bed. His face was calm, as if there weren't any fluctuations. Only that pair of eyes seemed to be flashing with an unknown light. The palace magician's face was very ugly. He stared at the doctor and said angrily, "Ignorant thing! How would you know the magic potion that I concocted?" "I really don't know. But I'm a doctor." This brave doctor said proudly, "No matter how magical magic is, it can't go against the laws of the world. Or, even if it can, it's not something that someone of your level can do. Although I don't know your magic potion, I at least know medical skills. I know what's good for the human body and what's bad for the human body. At least, what's poisonous, I can still distinguish." Saying that, his eyes flashed with a trace of determination. He forcefully nodded his head. "Your Majesty, I know that you're anxious to get rid of this painful illness, so you've gradually stopped trusting in medical skills. But please believe that magic isn't omnipotent. It's impossible to use magic to solve all problems. To treat illnesses, you still have to rely on medical skills. I know that no matter what I say, you won't completely believe me." He clenched his teeth and held the bottle of blue liquid. He said loudly, You've consumed those magical leaves, your body is already filled with poison. This poison is enough to kill people. If you don't believe me, please take a look." Saying that, he brought the bottle to his mouth, and was about to drink the blue liquid in the bottle. The Emperor's expression changed, and he shouted in a low voice, "Stop him!" The middle-aged man in the corner suddenly flashed and appeared beside the medical officer. He gently reached out and snatched the bottle from the medical officer's mouth. The doctor was stunned, and he raised his head to look at the mysterious expert beside the Emperor. "If you want to prove it, you don't have to seek death." The Emperor sat on the bed and slowly shook his head. "Bring 2 dogs over." Soon, a servant brought the 2 dogs into the room. The dogs raised in the palace were naturally strong and sturdy. The doctor looked at the middle-aged man and said firmly, "Let the dogs drink it. If the dogs don't die, I'll kill myself to atone for my crime." The middle-aged man looked at Emperor Cantos, closed his eyes and nodded. Soon, less than 1/3 of the blue liquid mixed with the Emperor's blood bead was drunk by a dog. A few minutes later, the dog suddenly whimpered a few times. Its body twitched and it immediately fell to the ground. After trembling a few times, it died. Within the room, the surrounding servants and guards turned pale with fright. Many of the guards had already pulled out their weapons and surrounded the court magician. The magician's expression was ugly to behold, but he still shouted, "That's not right. That bottle contains the doctor's own liquid medicine. Perhaps that liquid medicine is poisonous." The doctor immediately shouted back, "If you don't believe me, you can try again. This time, Your Majesty, please cut your skin. Just a few drops of blood and nothing else. Give it to a dog to drink. Then everything will be clear." The Emperor opened his eyes, and a sharp glint flashed across his eyes. He immediately pulled out a small silver knife from the bedside and quickly cut his thumb. Then, he tossed the blade stained with his blood to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man nodded. Holding the small knife, he gently cut the remaining dog's skin. 5 minutes. However, 5 minutes later, the dog's body suddenly twitched. In less than a moment, it howled a few times and white foam flowed out from its mouth. Then, it fell to the ground. This time, even the Emperor himself had a change of expression. The middle-aged man turned around and looked at the Emperor. There was a strange and complicated look in his eyes. "Everyone leave. Emperor, stay with the doctor." The Emperor raised his hand. The Emperor's order stunned all the guards. However, when the Emperor's dignified gaze swept over them, they finally retreated. The doctor raised his head blankly and watched everyone leave. The magician was already kneeling on the ground. He looked at the Emperor with a faint look of helplessness on his face. "All right, get up." The Emperor smiled bitterly. "Get up. Your Majesty, please forgive my incompetence." The one who spoke was the magician. "I don't blame you." Emperor Cantos shook his head. "From the beginning, you told me that this treatment method is poisonous and cannot really cure my illness. It can only help me recover in a short period of time. However, it will greatly shorten my lifespan. I know. This is my own choice. I don't blame you." The doctor was dumbfounded. After all, he had been in the imperial family for a long time. In an instant, he realized that he might have done something bad with good intentions. "You get up too." The Emperor looked at the doctor and said, "I don't blame you. You are loyal to me, that's why you did this. I will only be grateful for your loyalty and won't blame you." After a pause, the Emperor smiled bitterly and said, "However, you owe this magician an apology." The doctor immediately bowed his head to the magician. "Your Majesty, The magician smiled bitterly. "All right. I didn't do things carefully and you saw through me. I don't blame you. Your loyalty to the Emperor is naturally good. I need some time. I need to let the people see a healthy Emperor. I need to let the soldiers see that their Emperor is still alive on the city wall. I can't let outsiders see my weak appearance. This will reduce the morale of the army and the cohesion of the people. The emperor said slowly, I know this method will only make me die faster, but I have no other choice. After a pause, he looked at the magician and the doctor in front of him. What I want to know now is, how long can I live? Seeing that both of them were hesitating, the emperor immediately said in a deep voice, I don't need any meaningless comfort. I don't need any white lies. Your answer will have a huge impact on the fate of the empire. I need to know exactly how much time I have left. I need to make full use of this time to deal with some of the most important problems. About half a month. The doctor gave his answer. There is already too much poison in your blood. Although I don't know what method the magician used to prevent the poison from killing you temporarily, but as the poison increases, it has already begun to damage your body's functions. And it seems that this poison has already begun to harm your body, and the speed is getting faster and faster. So, my judgment is that the shortest is 14 to 15 days, and the longest is no more than 20 days. The emperor raised his eyebrows. Your Majesty. The court magician shook his head. My opinion is not so optimistic. He looked at the doctor beside him. This gentleman's judgment is based on the poison content in your blood. Unless you stop my treatment from now on, then the date he said is reasonable. But you still need to continue the treatment to ensure that you have a clear mind. Every time this treatment is done, it will shorten your life again. According to my calculations, if you want to maintain a clear mind in the remaining time, you need to continue the treatment, so, according to my calculations, your remaining time will not exceed 10 days. The shortest is about 7 days. 7 days. The emperor's expression was gloomy, but soon, he suddenly laughed. Good. Knowing exactly when I will die is much better than suddenly collapsing and leaving behind a mess. He then shook his head. The feeling of waiting for death, I don't have time to think about this. Saying this, the emperor stood up from the bed and looked at the two of them. Thank you for your honest answers. Please believe that your answers have brought great benefits to the empire. After that, he looked at the middle-aged man. Now I need to see our Prime Minister. It is time to make a will. Send someone to invite our Prime Minister. Oh, Adric is not needed, let him continue to deal with those Lantis. In the afternoon of that day, the Emperor personally climbed up the city wall, which greatly boosted the morale of the defenders who had just repelled an attack by the rebel army. The Emperor personally placed an imperial flag on the tower of the Triumphal Arch, then pointed at the imperial flag and said loudly, I swear here. After this battle, if we can win, all of you will be the new nobles of the empire. As long as the Krenma family exists, we will never let you down. Looking at the cheers of the soldiers on the city wall, among the crowd, there was a person sitting at the foot of the city wall, leaning lazily there, gently wiping the spear in his hand. He had a majestic figure and a head full of short hair that resembled steel needles. Yi Lin raised his head to look at the people on the city wall who were holding up their weapons and cheering. He looked at the focus of everyone, the emperor who was like the moon surrounded by stars. Hypocrite. A sneer. Tomorrow is my birthday, everyone. See if there are any guaranteed monthly tickets. If there are, then send it over, consider it my birthday red packet, ha ha ha. Also, about the matter of the rewards, I will mention it again. Many of my friends have said that they can give as much as they want, and I accept their kind intentions. However, don't waste money. You can just give me $1 as a token of appreciation for something like this. That is enough. It would be better to save it to subscribe to the later chapters. __, to be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 328. GOR Chapter 311 Dora's Conjecture, Damn it. To think that Lao Tzu would die in this damned place. Shea sighed in annoyance as he brandished the flaming fork in his hand. Under the illumination of the crimson killing intent, the flaming fork became like a torch as it swept back and forth. He was forced into a corner by the dense swarm of ants. He could only rely on the light of the flaming fork to forcefully disperse the swarm of ants surrounding him. Although the gold-devouring ants were naturally afraid of light, there was only one prey here, Shea. The temptation was too strong and the swarm of ants refused to disperse. Instead, they surrounded Shea layer by layer. Only when the light of the flaming fork swept over them would they retreat like a receding tide. However, after the flaming fork swept over them, they would swarm forward once more. This process continued for a while and Shea was already panting from exhaustion. The crimson killing intent radiating from the flaming fork was no longer as strong as it was in the beginning. It was foreseeable that once Shea was exhausted and the crimson killing intent dissipated, the ants would rush forward in a frenzy and gnaw at him until not even his bones would be left. This crimson killing intent consumed a great deal of energy. Shea swung the flaming fork back and forth in a circle. However, after 100 times, the circle he controlled gradually shrank. The surrounding ants were getting closer and closer. Some of the ants from the cave behind him had already landed on Shea's shoulder. The cloves on Shea's shoulder were simply incapable of stopping the gnawing of the gold-devouring ants. He cried out in pain and brandished the flaming fork, slicing off a piece of his clothes and flesh. Only then was he able to disperse the ants on his body. However, the smell of blood stimulated the surrounding ants, and the swarm of ants became even more frenzied. Shea sighed helplessly to himself. Son of a bitch, it seems that Lao Tzu is going to die in this damned place. Lao Tzu has yet to become a general. Lao Tzu has yet to become a high-ranking official. Lao Tzu had yet to lead a group of brothers into Odin's imperial city. The most regrettable thing was, damn, Lao Tzu wasn't married yet. Lao Tzu was still a virgin. Okay, the stupid country bumpkin didn't know that he was no longer a virgin. He sighed in his heart and shouted, "Hey! Dora, Lao Tzu is about to die. It's a pity that he couldn't help you return to that bullshit holy tomb." Dora's voice seemed to be very calm. She sighed softly. "All right, I shouldn't have placed my hopes on a pitiful fool like you. So what if I die? I've already died once anyway. This time, my soul will just float forever. Motherf ***, do you have any ideas?" Shea shouted angrily. Lao Tzu hasn't married yet. He hasn't tasted a woman in his life. Just as he finished shouting, Dora suddenly sneered. An idiot will always be an idiot. Fine, since you're about to die, I'll tell you. Sigh, ignorant brat. Actually, you've already. At the last moment, Dora seemed to be unwilling to let Shea die like this. She seemed to want to tell the country bumpkin some secret truth. As for the truth, don't forget that when Shea was drunk in that brothel in the imperial city, he and poor thing had sex. At that time, this country bumpkin was drunk and unconscious. He even took the poor thing's virginity in a daze. However, he himself was still ignorant. Don't forget that although Shea had lost his consciousness at that time, Dora, who was hidden in his consciousness, was still awake. This evil female dragon had witnessed a good show from the beginning. After all, Dora remembered that she and Shea were acquaintances. At the last moment, she planned to tell Shea the inside story so that this brat wouldn't die in vain. However, just as Dora was halfway through her words, she suddenly heard a loud rumbling sound above her head. A huge rock came crashing down from the top of the cave. This time, it was about to hit Shea's head without any deviation. Even though he brandished his flaming fork and instantly cut the rock into 5 or 6 pieces, this pile of rocks still fell on his body. With a boom, the country bumpkin was directly buried under the rocks. When such a large pile of rocks fell, the surrounding ants were immediately frightened and retreated. The pitiful Shea was smashed to the point of dizziness. Fortunately, His body had been strengthened by the dragon's blood. Otherwise, if he was an ordinary person, his brain would have burst open. 5 or 6 huge rocks were pressing down on Shea's body, and the dust was choking him to the point of being unable to breathe. He exerted himself to flip over and fiercely hacked out with his flaming fork. With a loud sound, a red line appeared on the pile of rocks pressing down on his body. Then, it split apart from the two sides. Shea climbed up from below and stretched out his hand to grab onto the top of the rock. Coincidentally, he raised his head to look above his head. The originally bell-like ceiling of the cave suddenly heard a sound like muffled thunder, following which, a series of cracking sounds could be heard. On the ceiling of the cave, a dense web of fine cracks suddenly appeared like a spider's web. These cracks quickly spread out to the surroundings. Soon, a faint black-colored flame aura emerged from these cracks. The black-colored flame aura became increasingly dazzling and finally, rumble. After the entire cave shook fiercely, it was as though the heavens and earth were falling apart. Almost half of the ceiling of the cave collapsed down. Amidst the falling rocks, a black silhouette descended from the sky with a whoosh. He stood amidst the rubble. Black-colored long robes, black-colored soft armor, a resolute face, cold stone-like eyes. If this was not Hastings, who could it be? Shea suddenly saw Hastings break through the ceiling of the cave and descend from the sky. When he landed before him, he immediately cried out in alarm. Hastings landed on the ground and his eyes swept around. He saw that this cave was filled with densely packed gold-devouring ants. Although they were forced to retreat by the falling rocks, once the falling rocks stopped, they would immediately make a comeback. Hastings gave a harumph and stared at Shea. He sneered and said, "We meet again, junior brother." "He that, we meet again." Shea scratched the back of his head and forced out a shameless smile. Hastings ignored Shea and slowly raised his palm. Instantly, a black-colored ball of light condensed within his palm. The black-colored ball of light carried with it a flowing flame aura. On its surface, there were several black-colored electric cocoons slowly flowing about. It was as though there was a small-scale storm hidden within his palm. Hastings raised his palm high above his head. Then, he gently flipped his palm over so that his palm faced down. The black-colored ball of light, mixed with the flowing electric currents, spread out in an instant. It transformed into countless flowing black-colored lights. Like a stretch of black-colored flames, they swept out in all directions. Shea felt his heart pounding madly. The intense feeling of power surging out caused his heart to beat so fast that it felt as though it was about to collapse. The surrounding gold-devouring ants were scorched by the black-colored flames. In but an instant they were turned into black-colored dust. When the wind blew, the dust dissipated. As for the remaining black flames, they transformed into countless streams of light. As they spread out, they automatically split into hundreds of streams and drilled into the holes on the walls of the cavern. Next, a whistling sound similar to that of the wind could be heard coming from the holes. Next, a stretch of black-colored dust could be seen flying out from the holes. Clearly, the nest of the gold-devouring ants had also been turned into dust by the black-colored flames. Resplendent. Hastings's resplendent. What an overbearing resplendent. Shea stood in the same place, completely shocked. Such a powerful and overbearing move. In but an instant, Hastings slowly lowered his hand. Amidst the black-colored dust that was flying everywhere in the cave, he slowly turned around and stared at Shea. At this moment, Shea's face was filled with shock as he looked at Hastings. It was only at this moment that Shea finally felt the power of Hastings. First time. Hastings stared at Shea. After a long while, he coldly spat out this short sentence. "What first time?" Shea's eyes widened. "This is the first time I have spared your life." Hastings said indifferently, "I am very fair. Although I had spared you once before, That time was because Vaya had stepped forward to save you. It does not count as me sparing you. However, just now, consider it as me sparing your life. Stupid kid, you only have 3 precious chances. But you thought yourself clever and nearly killed yourself. At the same time, you also wasted a chance to save your life. Hastings suddenly smiled, revealing his white teeth. I really hope that you can quickly come up with something else. 2 more times. 2 more times. Just 2 more times. I can kill you without any scruples, you stupid fool. Shea took a deep breath, stabilizing his breathing. He looked at Hastings and nodded. Good, very fair. Just now I locked you in there and escaped. After you came out, you did not kill me. This is your first chance to spare my life. After saying that, Hastings no longer paid any attention to Shea. Instead, he carefully searched the surroundings of the cave. The ant's nest had been completely burned down by the black-colored flames. However, the mysterious thing about the flames was that the rocks on the ground were not damaged. Only the metal-devouring ants were completely destroyed. Hastings looked around for a while and frowned. How can there be metal-devouring ants here? It is unreasonable. If this is the place where the ancient gnomes created the gods, then if they leave these metal-devouring ants here, aren't they worried that these things will reproduce and cause damage to this place? Shea opened his mouth. He wanted to tell Hastings that this was not the creation god area. The real creation god area should be in the forest, not far from the Zaku tribe. However, when the words reached his mouth, Shea chose to remain silent. This should be the lowest level. Hastings shook his head, his face becoming more and more unsightly. Shea immediately remembered he had locked Hastings in the first floor, and then he had come to the lowest level through that room. In that case, Hastings had broken through several floors of this underground cave with his own strength to come here. Hastings's face became more and more unsightly. After looking at the holes in the walls around here, he turned his head and stared at Shea. When you came in, did you find anything strange here? No. Shea shook his head. As soon as I came in, I saw these holes everywhere. Then those damn metal-devouring ants came out. Lao Tzu almost became ant feces here. Impossible, it shouldn't be like this. Hastings' voice was a bit strange. It shouldn't be like this. It should be this place. Why is there nothing here? Shea also said, this place is like a sealed jar. There isn't even an exit. There is no way in or out. How can we get out of here? We can't go back the way we came and go through that waterway, right? The magic power of my water avoidance pearl is not enough for us to climb back. I don't care about any exits. Hastings suddenly became agitated. I want to find the precious items left behind by the gnomes. He suddenly became enraged. His entire body emitted a black flame aura. The powerful aura immediately threw Shea's entire body backwards. His body heavily slammed into the wall. Hastings's face was terrifyingly gloomy and his eyes flashed with a manic light. He suddenly shouted and raised his hand to hack down. A black flame shot out from his palm. With a bang, the wall of the cave in front of him collapsed into pieces. The hole in the cave was dug at least 7 to 8 meters deep from the wall with his void cleave. However, the inside was still rock and there was nothing to be found. Impossible, impossible, teacher would not lie to me. Hastings muttered to himself. Then, as though he had gone mad, he frantically swung his palms to the front, back, left and right. After a few hacks, flames shot out in all directions and the surrounding walls collapsed. However, what could he find? Shea's entire body was aching from the earlier collision. However, seeing that Hastings had gone mad, he quickly jumped up to stop him. Hey! Don't go crazy again. If you go on like this place will collapse because of you. Do you want to be buried alive? The muscles at the corners of Hastings's eyes trembled slightly. He suddenly shouted and crouched down. Both his arms fiercely pierced into the ground. Under his hands, the originally hard ground became as soft as tofu. He easily pierced both his arms into the ground. Then, with a forceful pull, he dug out a large hole in the ground. He quickly threw the stone to the side and started digging with his bare hands. This ability to dig out stones with his bare hands caused Shea to inwardly suck in a breath of cold air. Oh my God! This Hastings is a black rat. He is even better at digging than a rat. Hastings had only dug for a short while, and he had already dug out a 2-meter deep hole. Hastings stood at the bottom of the hole and continuously tossed the stones he had dug up. After a short while, a furious and despairing roar could be heard from Hastings. How could this be? Shea walked to the edge of the hole and looked down at Hastings, who was standing at the bottom. Hastings stood at the bottom of the hole. His hands were hugging his head as he angrily pulled at his hair. Beneath his feet, the color of the rocks beneath the ground had turned into a dark gray color. This gray color is a type of underground rock stratum. Judging from the color, it's definitely a natural rock stratum. It can't be man-made. Dora's voice sounded in his mind. It looks like there's really nothing underground. I don't care about the goblin's inheritance. What I care about is how to get out. Where is the exit? Shea muttered. Shea, Dora's voice suddenly revealed a trace of complexity and unease. Just now, when I was looking at the shape of this place, I suddenly remembered something. Dora's tone was very solemn. Don't say anything. Be careful not to let Hastings notice. I will speak. Just listen. After a pause, Dora slowly said, This underground cavern, in terms of scale, seems to be much smaller than Demandra's hiding place, the real creation god area. That underground cavern occupies a huge area with countless underground passages. It is simply like a huge maze. But what about this place? Think about it carefully. This place seems to only have one room that goes up and down. It leads to the various levels of the cavern. If you look at it from this shape, the scale of this place is much smaller. At most, it is like a building with a few floors. It is just that the stairs have been replaced with the room that goes up and down. Shea nodded. Most importantly, I suddenly realized that the area of this place. Have you taken a closer look? The approximate area of each level is about the same, and Dora's tone was a little agitated. Do you still remember what the last place we were at when we escaped from that cave back then was like? Hearing Dora's words, Shea suddenly remembered, at that time, after an adventure in the underground ruins of the ancient gnomes near the Kaku tribe, before finally escaping from it, the little girl Su Ling in the Kaku tribe accidentally touched some self-destruct device, and the entire creation god area began to collapse. Their group finally ran to the end of the passage. It was a circular plaza about 100 meters wide. The circular plaza was underground. It was like an underground cavern that had been hollowed out, an incomparably huge underground cavern. At that time, Merlin had also inspected that place. That circular square was obviously man-made. It was made of expensive iron essence and magic crystals, and everywhere was filled with magic patterns. Merlin had also said that the magic patterns appeared to be a giant magic array. That's right. Merlin had also said that it was a giant teleportation magic array. That's right, a teleportation magic array. A teleportation magic array that had exhausted all its magic. A space that was almost identical to the shape of this underground cavern. Today is my birthday. I have received many gifts and blessings from my friends. Thank you very much, everyone. Let me say this again. I am 29, not 30. I will never admit that I am 30. I am 29. Finally, I ask for monthly votes. I ask for recommendation votes. Today, everyone, give me all your votes. Also, give me a tip. Just give me $1 as a token of appreciation. Consider it a red packet for Little Five's birthday, haha. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 330. Begging for Votes. Begging for Votes. GOR Chapter 312. Hastings's shackles. Thinking back to the shape of the huge space, it was a circular underground cavern with a width of over 100 meters. Looking up from the bottom, there was a height of around 100 meters above the surface. It was as though a huge circular jar had been pulled out from the ground. A huge circular jar, wouldn't that be exactly the same as the circular cavern he was in now? Magic teleportation matrix. Shea's face sank. You mean to say, Dora's voice took on a very unpleasant tone. That is right. I suspect that this place that we are in right now should have existed within that creation god area. Do you still remember that teleportation matrix that had exhausted all its magic power? I suspect that this underground cavern that we are in right now should have been there. However, he used magic to teleport the entire underground cavern that looked like a round jar and finally teleported it here. Pausing, Dora continued in an indifferent tone. Because this place was originally a complete underground structure of the gnomes. Then, the gigantic magic array teleported it here and hid it here. In other words, Shea exhaled. It was impossible to tell whether he was crying or laughing. In other words, there may not be any entrance or exit here. This entire underground cavern is a complete structure that was teleported here by a gigantic magic array. By then, Hastings had stepped out from the deep hole that he had dug out earlier. He walked very slowly and his footsteps were heavy. At that moment, however, there was a hazy expression on Hastings's face. Within that seemingly calm expression, there were signs that something was about to erupt. Can't find it, Hastings muttered to himself. His eyes were clearly unfocused and he appeared somewhat lost. Can't find it, why can't I find it? His eyes, finally, became crazed bit by bit. Hastings clenched both his fists. Raising his head, he roared loudly. Why can't I find it? How is this possible? A hoarse roar reverberated in the cave, and the echoes reverberated in Shea's ears. He saw a hint of danger in Hastings's eyes, as expected. After looking around, Hastings's gaze suddenly landed on Shea. His blank eyes instantly constricted, and then exploded with a violent and murderous aura. It's all your fault. It's all your fault. Hastings suddenly strode forward and arrived beside Shea. He extended his hand and grabbed at Shea's neck. Shea attempted to dodge, and at the same time, he immediately brandished his fire fork and hacked down. But how could he dodge Hastings's movements? Shea felt a sharp pain in his hand. Suddenly, the flaming fork flew out of his hand and landed on the ground. At the same time, Hastings's fingers had already wrapped around Shea's neck. Like an iron clamp, his fingers tightly gripped onto Shea's neck. Then, he violently tightened his grip. Under the intense pain, Shea attempted to shout out. However, he could not even breathe, let alone make any sound. He struggled with all his might, attempting to pry open Hastings's fingers. However, Hastings's fingers were as hard as iron. How could he pry it open? Shea felt as though his lungs were about to explode. Cracking sounds could be heard coming from his neck. He could not care less. His crimson murderous aura erupted and he swung his fist at Hastings's chest. Pung pung. Shea's fist landed on Hastings's chest. However, when his fist, which contained the crimson murderous aura, landed on Hastings's body only swayed slightly. However, his fingers, which were gripping onto Shea's neck, did not move in the slightest. Shea, on the other hand, felt a sharp pain in his fingers after throwing out a few punches. It was as though his fingers were about to burst. This fellow's body is so strong? Shea was shocked. He threw out punches and kicked. However, when his punches landed on Hastings's body, it was as though he was throwing a stone into the ocean. Not even a ripple could be seen. The murderous aura within Hastings's eyes grew thicker. Shea could feel blood trickling out from the corners of his mouth. His face was flushed red, and it seemed as though blood was about to seep out. His eyes bulged out and his consciousness gradually blurred. Lao Tzu is going to die, is going to die, is going to be killed by this madman. Damn it, without a weapon in his hand, he was simply unable to harm Hastings with his bare hands. Shea's consciousness had begun to dissipate. Only the last trace of his consciousness was still fumbling around his body, trying to find a weapon. In his confusion, he used all his strength to pry open Hastings's fingers. However, he accidentally touched the pendant hanging around his neck. Shea only felt that there was a cold and hard object in his hand. At this moment, he had no other choice and did not think much about it. He just held it tightly. Under the light of the crimson Do Chi, he pinched it in his hand and viciously smashed it towards Hastings's head. Bang! Hastings's mind was in a mess at this moment. The only clear thought was endless violence. Once the expectations that had been buried in the depths of his heart for a long time were dashed, this huge drop immediately drew out all the negative emotions in his heart. He only felt that his heart was filled with murderous aura. Murderous aura. All the violence finally condensed together to form an unparalleled murderous aura. He only wanted to kill all the moving objects in front of him. It seemed that this was the only way to make his heart happy. With the man's neck in his hand, Hastings did not want to think about who this person was and why he was here. There was only one thought in his mind. Kill him. Kill him. Kill him. Shea's punches and kicks landed on Hastings's body. Not only did it not wake Hastings up, it instead aroused his fierceness. Finally, bang! Like a ball of red light, it directly hit Hastings's forehead. The sharp edges and corners of the crystal pierced Hastings's forehead. Even Shea's heavy punches were unable to cause any damage to Hastings, but the edges and corners of the crystal pierced Hastings' forehead until it was dripping with blood. Immediately after, the red light seemed to have found a vent. But soon, black flames emerged from Hastings's eyes. The black flames and the red light were entangled and twisted together. As one weakened and the other strengthened, the black flames soon became stronger and stronger, while the red light was gradually forced back. Hastings's body was shrouded in black gas. Finally, with a whoosh, all the black light was directly injected into the crystal. The original crystal, after the endless black flames were injected, suddenly lit up. It was as if the more black gas was injected, the brighter and redder the crystal became. It was so red that it looked like it was about to drip. In the end, it was as if Shea's hand was not holding a crystal, but a red star. Hastings only felt that the violence in his body seemed to have finally been vented. The black flames, almost unstoppable, rushed out of his body and swept away like a tide. Finally, he regained a bit of clarity. After all the violence had faded away, he still had a trace of clarity. Hastings immediately discovered the strangeness of this situation. He felt the bright murderous aura in his body wildly leaking out, and then the waves in his heart gradually calmed down. But as the fingers loosened, Shea fell to the ground. The two of them were finally separated. After the crystal left Hastings's forehead, it was immediately grasped in Shea's palm. Almost at the same time, Hastings's legs bent and he knelt on the ground. His whole body fell backward. The two of them almost fell into a coma at the same time. The red light of the crystal in Shea's hand was still shining like a star. The red light flashed, but little by little it sank into Shea's body. His body almost became translucent. It looked like his whole person was like a huge crystal, a red crystal. After the skin became transparent, the tendons in the flesh and blood were clearly visible. The red light, like blood, flowed along these tendons and veins, and flowed all over his body. Shea's body began to change. His skin began to gradually become dry, and then, as if dehydrated, it became harder and thicker, and finally became a thick layer of hard horn-like texture. Then it fell off little by little. The red flesh inside was exposed, and the muscles were wriggling as if they were gradually strengthening. His muscles were becoming thicker and denser. Finally, new skin grew out and covered his entire body once again. However, the heart in his chest was beating again and again. Thump thump, thump thump, thump thump. The sound became thicker and more powerful. It was like the beating of a drum. After an unknown period of time, Shea was the first to wake up among the two unconscious men. As soon as he woke up, his first reaction was to raise his hand to touch his neck. As soon as he raised his finger, he heard a clatter. Something in his hand fell to the ground. He turned his head and saw a black stone rolling on the ground. After a closer look, he recognized that it was his pendant crystal. At that moment, the crystal had lost all its luster. It had become, how should he put it? Although the crystal was usually black and unremarkable, at that moment it had lost all its luster. It was as though it had lost all its life force. It was as though the things that were originally contained within it had been completely hollowed out. If the crystal had originally looked like a piece of stone, then at that moment it looked like a piece of rotten wood. Shea subconsciously extended his hand to pinch it. However, the moment his fingertips made contact with the crystal, he heard a "paw" sound. It shattered. The entire stone was like a clump of sand as it slid down from his fingertips. Shea was completely dumbfounded. He knew very well that he had not used any strength earlier. However, this item had seemingly decayed and withered. With just a light poke, it had shattered. It had been completely shattered? He immediately jumped up and stared at the small pile of sand on the ground with his eyes wide open. He tried to bend down to collect these things. He didn't know if it was because of sadness or some other feeling. He only felt that his heart was empty. This was one of the few things that the old man had left for him. Additionally, it was an important medium for him to use the crimson killing intent. How could it? Shea looked at the pile of sand on the ground and subconsciously raised his finger to touch his neck. From now on, he would no longer have this pendant. However, the moment his hand touched his neck, Shea immediately realized that something was amiss. His neck had nearly been broken by Hastings earlier. However, when he touched it, the skin on his neck was smooth and intact. Where was the trace of a wound? More importantly, when Shea raised his hand, he could clearly feel that he was no longer in a weakened state like he was when he had just escaped from the line between life and death. His fingers, arms, and even his body were filled with power. Power. This feeling of being filled immediately made him feel a surge of impulse in his body. A wave of heat. It was as though some kind of power was urging him to do something. He raised his head and looked around. Then, he quickly walked to the side and picked up a piece of stone. Holding it in his hand, he exerted some force. As expected, the stone was crushed by his hand. It was as though the stone in his hand was not a stone, but a fragile egg. Shea was shocked by his own strength. Although he knew that he had great strength, he was definitely not at the level where he could crush a stone with his bare hands. His curiosity was piqued and he picked up a few more stones. He crushed them. His heart pounded wildly. As Shea was scratching his head, a cold voice came from behind him. "Have you had enough fun?" Shea and Wu Ran turned around to see Hastings sitting on the ground. Hastings' eyelids were raised as he stared coldly at Shea. Shea immediately realized that it was this guy in front of him who had almost killed him just now. And what happened just now? He seemed to have struggled, then punched and kicked, and then, that's right. He held onto the pendant and smashed it against Hastings' head, and then it seemed that Hastings had let go. And then the two of them fainted at the same time? After figuring that out, Shea's eyes widened and he shouted at Hastings. Hey, you bastard! Do you know that you nearly killed me just now? Hastings' face was surprisingly calm. He raised his eyelids to look at Shea and said coolly, "You didn't die, did you?" After saying that, the corners of his mouth twitched. "Don't just stand there. Although you suffered a little, you gained even more." Humph. Shea looked at his palm and his heart skipped a beat. "You mean to say, my strength, humph, I really don't know what teacher taught you." Hastings straightened his body and looked at Shea. There was a faint smile on his face. "Could it be you don't know what happened just now?" Shea shook his head and stared with widened eyes. "Just now, with the help of my resplendent chi flame, you finally fused with the crimson killing intent." Fuse? That sounded a little strange. An idiot is an idiot. Hastings gave a harumph. "Did you think that every time you use the powerful crimson killing intent, you would need to use that broken stone as a prop? If that is the case, if you don't have the stone, wouldn't you be unable to use the crimson killing intent? Idiot." Hastings pointed at his heart. "Killing intent exists within the body. However, your previous strength was too weak. Or rather, your own killing intent was too weak. It was not enough to use the powerful crimson killing intent. Thus, the crimson killing intent within the crystal that you used earlier was not your own strength. Rather." After saying that, Hastings smiled. Rather, it was the killing intent that teacher stored within it. In other words, this crystal is just a container. For beginners, teacher will give you a piece of crystal that contains the power of the crimson killing intent. In the process of using it, you will slowly comprehend that state. Before the power within the crystal is used up, if you can comprehend it and truly root the crimson killing intent within your body, then you will have truly learned this consummate skill. Otherwise, you will be a waste. Once the crimson killing intent within the crystal is used up and you have yet to truly learn it, then you will no longer have any fate with this consummate skill. Shea forced himself to think as he tried his best to digest Hastings' words. Then, he said, "You mean, just now, after I absorbed your resplendent chi power, I also absorbed the crimson killing intent that the old man left within the crystal into my body. In the future, even if I don't use this thing, I will still be able to use the crimson killing intent?" "Something like that," Hastings sneered. "I absorbed your power?" Shea's eyes began darting about. Hastings let out a long laugh, before casting a cold look at Shea. "What is it? Are you thinking of taking advantage of my current state of weakness to kill me off?" Shea nodded his head without hesitation and slowly moved closer to Hastings. "You have no chance." Hastings raised a finger and a black star burst out from the tip of his finger. Although it was only a black star, the light was incomparably flashing. "Little fellow, don't tell me you didn't find it strange earlier? Why would I give you such a detailed explanation? Do you think I would be so kind?" Hastings sneered. "What if you had immediately attacked me the moment you woke up? Or perhaps, when I had just woken up, you had immediately pounced on me. All the resplendent chi within my body had been sucked away by you. Back then, I had fainted and the circulation of my body had stopped. That was when the old power had been emptied and the new power had yet to be born. Perhaps, you would have succeeded. But now..." Hastings gently flicked his finger and a black-colored light streaked past Shea's cheek. Suddenly, he heard a loud bang, and in the cave far behind him, an explosion occurred. Shattered rocks flew everywhere. "Now you have no chance. Since I have woken up, the new resplendent chi has automatically been born. Although you've gained a lot of benefits, it's not too difficult for me to kill you." Shea quickly took 2 steps back. His face was all smiles as he laughed. "Ha ha! Misunderstanding. Earlier, I was just casually talking about it. I still need to thank you." "No need to thank me. Speaking of which, I should be thanking you as well." Hastings suddenly tore open the front part of his clothes. The soft armor that he was wearing was like a piece of paper to his fingertip. With just a light tug, it was instantly torn apart. Hastings exposed his sturdy chest. Shockingly, there was a small scar on the left side of his chest where his heart was located. I want to thank you. Earlier, if it were not for the fact that I was able to vent my power, I would have been unable to conceal my true power and would have burst out. I had endured humiliation for so many years and had to hide my face. That person would have been able to sense the true level of my power. Thankfully, I was able to vent my power and did not expose myself. A trace of loneliness flashed across Hastings's eyes, and he shook his head. However, it does not matter. At any rate, I did not find what I was looking for. I have already made up my mind. This time, regardless of whether I find it or not, I do not plan on hiding anymore. After saying that, he suddenly extended his right index finger and gently tapped his chest. With a pop sound, a thin bloody hole was poked out of his chest by his finger. Blood flowed out. Shea took a deep breath. Hey, that even if you are unhappy, there is no need to harm yourself, right? Humph. Hastings did not answer. Instead, he suddenly sat down and crossed his legs. Next, his left hand pressed down on his chest, while his right index finger gently pressed down on the bloody hole on his chest. Next, he took a deep breath and a thick layer of black chi enveloped his face. The black chi grew thicker and Hastings's original face became blurred. At that moment, Shea's mouth gaped open and he stared in shock at Hastings's finger. As the finger moved upwards bit by bit, a thin needle as thin as a strand of hair slowly emerged from the bloody hole beneath the fingertip. The needle was thin and long and there were droplets of blood staining its surface. It was as though Hastings's fingertip possessed a powerful suction force that sucked the needle out from his body. When the needle was completely pulled out from Hastings's chest, Hastings grabbed it and opened his palm. The needle was shockingly as long as a finger. Oh my God! Shea cried out. What is this thing? How did it end up in your chest, could it be that all this time? Hastings gasped for breath and sneered. That is right. This needle had been stuck in my body all this time. It pierced my heart. It was suppressing my power. It was like a rope that was restraining me, not allowing me to use power that was beyond my limits. Needle pierced his own heart? The corners of Shea's eyes twitched. Who did it? Don't tell me it was that old man who did it. It was me. Hastings's answer caused Shea to stare with widened eyes. You yourself? Shea cried out. Is there something wrong with you? You stabbed a needle into your own heart? Hastings casually pinched the needle. There is naturally a reason why I did it. I did it to guard against that person. In order to hide my true strength. In order to prevent that person from discovering my true level. All this time, I have been strictly controlling the amount of power I use. This needle is the shackle I put on myself. Guard against others discovering your true strength. Shea's face turned odd. Who? Hastings's answer caused Shea's face to turn pale. Hannigan Saul, that is, His Majesty the Divine Emperor Odin. Humph. A requesting monthly votes. Requesting recommendation votes. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. But just as he reached the hole Hastings had created and was about to climb up, he heard Hastings' voice coming from the dark hole above him. Hastings, you're the one who's going to die. You're the one who's going to die. What is that? And? Shea's heart skipped a beat. While he was feeling surprised, he heard Hastings' voice coming from above. Hurry up and go down. Hurry up. After saying that, a figure fell down from above. It was Hastings. He fell directly onto Shea's body, and the two of them, fell down from the top of the cave. When they landed on the ground, Hastings lightly struggled and bounced Shea to the side, while he himself moved sideways to the side. Shea was smashed down from the top of the cave. When he landed, he felt dizzy. Just as he was about to open his mouth to vent his anger, he suddenly saw a dark green light pouring down from the top of the cave. It was like a stream of water, falling onto the ground where he had landed. Chee-chee sounds could be heard and thick smoke billowed out from the spot where he had landed. When he looked again, he saw that a large hole had appeared on the ground. What was pouring down was not a green light, but a green sticky liquid. The sticky liquid seemed to have a strong corrosive effect. It had directly corroded a large hole into the stone ground. Seeing that, Shea's anger disappeared. He knew that if not for Hastings pushing him, he would have. Hastings stood there and quickly shouted, "Retreat to the corner! Hurry!" Before Shea could move, Hastings waved his hand and a powerful force swept him to the corner of the wall. Shea's buttocks landed on the ground and he saw a shocking change happening on the top of the cave. Clouds of smoke billowed out from the hole that Hastings had created. It was as though the green sticky liquid had corroded the cave. Next, a crashing sound could be heard from the inside. It seemed as though something was crawling out from the cave. Finally, a black thing came out from the top a little bit. It was black, shiny, round, and segmented. Shea stared blankly for a moment. Then, he heard Hastings sneer. "What kind of monster is that?" Hastings raised his palm and slashed out. Suddenly, a black-colored flame aura slashed out and struck the black substance. However, the seemingly invincible, resplendent, flame aura only left a shallow mark on the substance. It was as though it could not even cut through the surface layer of the substance. A howling sound could be heard coming from the top of the cave. It carried with it the scent of pain and annoyance. Then, the substance quickly retreated back into the cave. Next, a few crashing sounds could be heard coming from the top of the cave. The rubble on top of it fell to the ground with a clatter. More and more cracks could be seen spreading out from the edges of the cave. Finally, with a booming sound, a large piece of rock fell down from the sky. Thankfully, Shea and Hastings were already standing to the side. The large piece of rock fell from the sky and did not fall onto their bodies. After the dust settled, they looked up and saw that the cave above them was at least 10 times bigger. Finally, a crashing sound could be heard as a colossal creature slowly crawled out from the cave above them. Its original appearance was revealed. It had an inverted triangular body. Its body was at least several times the size of a horse. As for its 2 huge pincers, they were similar to the sickles and axes used by the ancient giants. Most importantly, the long tail behind this monster was at least 7 to 8 meters long. It was like a string of round balls, raised high and swinging gently. At the top of the tail was a huge crescent-shaped hook. When Shea saw this thing, he was dumbfounded. This son of a bitch! What a huge scorpion! The appearance of this scorpion was almost the same as the one he had encountered in the forest outside the Zaku tribe. However, its size was much bigger. More importantly, when he saw this thing, Shea immediately felt a deep sense of danger. This kind of dangerous aura was so strong. It even made Shea think of the feeling he had when he encountered Demandras in the underground cave in the forest of the Zaku tribe. This huge scorpion monster. Could it be a monster on the same level as Demandras? The scorpion charged down, its legs firmly clinging onto the holes on the ceiling of the cave. Its body was firmly attached to the ceiling of the cave. Most importantly, this fellow's attention was clearly focused on Hastings. The pair of huge pincers opened and closed, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws at Hastings. Clearly, in this monster's eyes, the only opponent that could pose a threat to it was Hastings, who was standing below. As for Shea, who was in the corner, it seemed to have automatically ignored him. Hastings's face was cold. He seemed to have sensed the strength of this monstrous opponent. He slowly moved his feet, not daring to rush into action. He clenched his fists and stared at the head of the huge scorpion. Finally, the huge scorpion seemed to have lost its patience. It suddenly swooped down from the top of its head. While its huge body was in the air, the huge pincers on its right side viciously clamped down on Hastings. With a caw sound, Hastings's body dodged, leaving behind only an afterimage as he was cleaved into two by the pincers. His real body, however, had instantly reappeared several meters away on the left side. As for the scorpion, it was too ferocious in its charge, and it slammed into a huge rock before it. With a booming sound, the rock shattered into pieces. The huge scorpion monster, however, remained unscathed. It nimbly turned its body around and stared at Hastings once more. The huge scorpion immediately launched an attack, its two pairs of pincers moving forward to clamp down on Chen Xiaoyan. Hastings was unarmed and had no choice but to dodge a few times. Although his speed was fast, leaving behind afterimages, he was still able to evade the scorpion's pincers. However, how big could this cave be? This monster seemed to be extremely cunning as well. It quickly forced Hastings into a corner. It was not that Hastings did not retaliate. He sent out 2 consecutive slashes. However, when the 2 slashes struck the surface of the scorpion monster's hard shell, they were only able to leave behind 2 marks. Shea, who was seated in the corner, was able to clearly sense this detail. When Hastings's slashes landed on the scorpion's body, a layer of faintly discernible light instantly appeared on the surface of the scorpion's shell. It was as though the power of the black flames had been neutralized by more than half in an instant. Finally, when Hastings was forced into a corner, he managed to dodge the scorpion's pair of huge pincers. However, this time, the scorpion suddenly turned around. The speed at which it turned around was astonishing. In an instant, it turned its huge body around and swung its tail. Bang! Hastings, who was in the middle of the air, was swept down by the scorpion. After his body fell to the ground, he rolled several meters away. Before he could stand up, the scorpion had already pounced over. Its 2 pincers danced about and the hooked stinger on its tail viciously stabbed down toward Hastings's body. Shea, who was seated in the corner, observed the danger. He could not care less. If something were to happen to Hastings, if Hastings was no match for it, even if he was the only one left, he would not be able to survive. Shea did not hesitate. He flew up and grabbed the flaming fork in his hand. With a shout, red light enveloped his body and the flaming fork in his hand shot out like a meteor. Caw! Before the stinger on the scorpion's tail could land, it was struck by the flaming fork. Under Shea's formidable strength, the scorpion's tail was knocked askew. Additionally, a small piece of its shell was cut off by the sharp flaming fork. The scorpion released a howl and suddenly opened its mouth. It sprayed out a mouthful of green-colored mucus at Shea, who was in the corner. Shea stared with widened eyes. Both his feet fiercely stamped on the ground, and he did his best to dash to the side. He managed to dodge the first attack. However, he did not expect that this scorpion's mucus attack would actually be. It was actually a damned continuous shot. The scorpion's mouth sprayed out a long string of mucus in one breath. One by one, the mucus swept out. After dodging 2, Shea was finally enveloped by the 3rd mucus. He was about to be drenched in it. This mucus was highly corrosive. He did not know if his dragon blood-enhanced body could withstand it. At that moment, Shea, who had already closed his eyes and was waiting for death, suddenly felt a gust of wind blowing against his face. Opening his eyes, he saw a mass of black-colored flaming chi roaring toward him. The mass of mucus was instantly incinerated. Raising his head, he saw that Hastings was already standing in the distance with his palm open. There was a cold expression on his face. However, the corners of his mouth carried a trace of a faint smile. Hastings' other hand was holding on to Shea's flaming fork. He sneered and said, "Who wants your help? Do you think that I cannot even deal with a big bug? Humph, just sit there and watch the show. I will be borrowing teacher's weapon for a while. Although his words were arrogant, a trace of warmth finally appeared within his eyes. That trace of warmth caused Shaya's heart to pound. Next, he saw Hastings holding onto the flaming fork. With a long roar, a raging black-colored flaming chi suddenly burst out. His entire body was like a huge mass of flames. The flaming fork in Hastings's hand hacked down fiercely. With a booming sound, the mass of black-colored flaming chi shot out like a dazzling comet. It directly slammed into the scorpion's body. Despite the size of the scorpion monster's body, it was actually blasted away. This colossal monster flew to the other side of the cave and slammed into the wall, causing the wall of the cave to sink down fiercely. A huge hole appeared on the wall and nearly half of its body was blasted into the rocks. Hastings's attack succeeded and he did not hesitate. He took a big step forward and appeared beside the scorpion. The flaming fork in his hand descended, bringing with it an expanse of black-colored chi. With a "ka" sound, the huge pincer on the scorpion's left side was cut off and fell to the ground. Hastings kept the flaming fork. Once again, with a "pu" sound, the flaming fork pierced into the scorpion's head. Both his hands held onto the flaming fork and he exerted force to pry open the scorpion's head. A large piece of its outer shell was pried open. The scorpion howled out in pain and a "hoo-la" sound could be heard. From the hole on its head, a large amount of that green mucus poured out. Hastings kept his flaming fork and flew to the side. The scorpion was embedded into the rock. After struggling for a bit, it stopped moving. Shaya stood up and could not help but sigh. The strong are the strong. Don't be so complacent. Hastings narrowed his eyes. His face was somewhat gloomy as he pointed up. Do you know? On the upper level, there are at least 10 more of these things. I don't even know where they came from. When I came down just now, I did not see these things. Declaring war. Requesting monthly votes. Erupt tomorrow. Come and get the monthly votes. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 333. GOR Chapter 314 Dora's Method. There are more than 10 of these scorpion monsters? Hearing that, Shaya was dumbfounded. The power of these giant scorpion monsters was not to be underestimated. At the very least, Hastings had found it difficult to damage their outer shells with his bare hands earlier. This ridiculously strong defensive power was enough to give him a headache. Not to mention, there were more than 10 of them. Shaya was confident that without the flaming fork in his hand, he would not be able to deal with even one of them. The power of these things is not bad. Hastings frowned and said, however, their outer shells are extraordinarily hard. Even my resplendent chi flames had a hard time breaking through them. In comparison, their offensive power is not too strong. However, I have never seen such a peculiar monster before. Such a ridiculously strong defense, and it seems to have some magical attributes as well. He stared intently at Shaya and said, there are still some up there. You stay here for now. I will go up first and kill those things. Do not act rashly. Otherwise, if you go up, not only will you not be able to help, you will also be throwing your life away. He weighed the flaming fork in his hand and said, I will borrow this weapon first. Humph, a pity I did not bring my tri-edged war spear with me. Otherwise, I would be able to kill all of these abominable insects. Does that mean he wants Lao Tzu to hide down there while he, Hastings, goes up first to open up a path? That is not a bad idea. Shaya thought to himself. You are a strong person. If you are willing to go up and open up a path, taking on all the dangers, Lao Tzu would be more than happy to oblige. Since Hastings had taken the initiative to suggest it, how could Shaya refuse? However, Hastings simply said, I will need to borrow the weapon that teacher gave you for now. The sharpness of this weapon is better than my tri-edged war spear. It just so happens that it is the nemesis of those strange insects. Although Xia couldn't bear to part with her. However, Hastings was going to risk his life while Chen Xiaolian could just sit there leisurely. Speaking of which, Chen Xiaolian was already getting a huge advantage. He just wanted to borrow a weapon. Moreover, what Hastings said was right. The shells of those strange scorpions were extremely hard. If they didn't have a weapon like the fire fork, it would be really difficult to deal with them. The most important thing was, although Hastings had repeatedly discussed with Xia about borrowing the fiery fork, Xia didn't know what to do. However, judging from the old man's expression and tone, and the fact that he was holding Xia's flaming fork in his hand, he didn't seem to be asking for anything at all. Instead, he held the flaming fork in his hand without any hesitation. Looking at his posture, although he kept saying borrow, if Xia really dared to open his mouth to refuse, Hastings wouldn't mind turning borrow into take. Forget it, the situation is beyond my control. I have no choice but to lower my head when I'm under someone else's roof. Damn it. Seeing Xia nod his head, Hastings's mouth revealed a trace of a strange smile. Don't worry, this is teacher's relic. I won't be greedy for your things. After killing those strange insects, I'll immediately return it to you. After saying that, Hastings had already jumped into the hole above his head. His figure quickly disappeared into the black hole. Xia simply sat at the edge of the cave, not far from the dead scorpion monster. Beside the scorpion monster, there was a lot of strong corrosive green mucus flowing out from the corpse. Xia sat far away from the green mucus. However, he was curious about something on the ground. On the ground, there was a huge scorpion pincer. It was the one that Hastings had chopped off from this giant scorpion's body with his flaming fork. The size of the scorpion pincer was bigger than Xia's body. Compared to the scorpion pincer, Xia's waist was like firewood. He couldn't help but pick up the big toy. It was quite heavy. Moreover, the outer shell of the scorpion pincer was extremely hard to the touch. Xia felt it for a moment. He feared that the outer shell of the scorpion might not be any weaker than Dora's dragon scales. This is a good thing. Xia sighed. If I can bring the corpse of this scorpion up and put on a set of scorpion armor, wouldn't it be very cool? Dora's voice came from within his mind. This thing is very strange. Kid, this place is filled with strangeness. I keep feeling that something is wrong. Before Xia could say anything, he suddenly heard a loud rumbling sound coming from above his head. Then, the cave shook a few times. A loud and clear howl came from within the cave. It was Hastings's voice. Hastings's voice was loud and full of momentum. Moreover, there was a string of faint roars of the strange scorpion in the distance. Obviously, it was far from being as loud and majestic as Hastings's howl. When Xia heard this, he smiled and said, "That old guy is really powerful. It seems that he has the upper hand." "It's not that simple." Dora's voice faintly contained some fear. "Think about it carefully. When we were in that underground cave, we clearly found the creation god area. However, we only found Demandras. We didn't find the real god created by the ancient gnomes. This question has always been in my heart. That is, where is the god created by the ancient gnomes?" Xia also calmed down. He slowly sat on the ground. After thinking for a while, he said, "Dora, what do you think?" Dora's voice was faintly trembling. "Xia, do you still remember the valley where we found the gnome's diary? I still remember that we once encountered a giant scorpion just above that valley. And that scorpion seemed to be weaker than the ones we encountered here." "Well, that's right." Xia nodded. "Well, let's not talk about these strange giant scorpions for the time being. The owner of the gnome's diary should be the commander of the last army guarding the creation god area in the ancient gnome race. The last gnome general wrote the diary, right? At that time, we were very suspicious about how the goblins who had turned into skeletons under the valley died. Moreover, after reading the diary recorded that the last army of the goblins should be guarding the cave in the Creation God area, so how could they appear in the valley we found? You know, the location of the Creation God area is near the Jaku tribe. It's not far from the valley we found. More importantly, according to the diary, the last army of the ancient gnomes was surrounded by the major races and died in the cave in the Creation God area. How could they have escaped outside? And in the end, how did they all die in that valley? After a pause, Dora slowly said, "One thing is certain. Those gnomes definitely didn't die in battle with the enemies of other races, because it didn't look like a battlefield, and except for the bones of the gnomes, there were no bones of other races, and the skeletons we saw, the appearance of those corpses, seemed to have died very peacefully, even strangely." Shea was a little scared by Dora's words. He took a deep breath and said, "Yes, it makes sense. We really haven't figured out the answer to these questions." Dora's voice also seemed to be sighing. "Then the next question is simple. Since those gnomes weren't killed by other races, then there are only two explanations for their deaths. First, they all committed suicide. The possibility of this hypothesis is very high. After all, knowing that their entire race had perished and their entire civilization had been destroyed, it's not strange that they chose to commit suicide in complete despair. But what? But don't forget, at the end of the diary, it was recorded very clearly. That gnome general awakened the gnome god. Shea's heart immediately moved. That's right. Since the god was awakened, the god that the gnomes spent so much to create must be incomparably powerful. Why didn't the situation turn around later? "Maybe there's a problem," Dora said slowly. "No matter what, we didn't find the gnome god in the Creation God area. But according to our search of the Creation God area, the most suspicious thing is that giant teleportation magic array. In other words, the gnome god might really be here." Shea jumped up from the ground at once. His expression also became serious and dignified. Dora's analysis was very likely. In the entire Creation God area, only the place where the huge teleportation magic circle was located seemed to have been dug out of a large part of a cave. And the magic power of the teleportation magic array was exhausted. Obviously, this underground building here was teleported from the Creation God area. Then, the gnome god that wasn't found in the Creation God area, could it really be here? But there's a problem. Dora said slowly. The diary records that the gnome general ordered to awaken the god. Remember, it wanted to awaken the god and then use the god's power to deal with the enemy. But why did it activate the magic array and transfer the god away? There must be some unforeseen event. Shea sighed. A diary is a diary after all. Even if something happened later, the gnome general didn't record it in it. If it were me, I'm afraid I wouldn't be in the mood to write a diary at that time. Okay, let's not think about this problem for now. I'll talk about the third question. Dora continued. The third question is the most important one. In the valley where the gnome diary was found, we met Scorpion. Here, we met Scorpion again. Then, Scorpion. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so. Shea didn't say anything. Dora continued. Let's make a hypothesis now. At that time, the gnome general ordered to awaken the god to deal with the enemies of the other races. But in the end, because of some reasons we don't know, the god that was supposed to be awakened to fight with the enemy failed. Maybe the awakening didn't succeed. Then, the gnomes changed their choice and didn't let the god fight. Instead, they used that giant magic array to teleport the god away. Of course, this is our hypothesis. But let's continue with this hypothesis for the time being. After a pause, Dora continued. The god was teleported away to a safe place. Then, if you were the gnome general and you ordered such an important god to be teleported away, you would bring a group of people with you. You will at least take a group of people with you and go with God, right? Because you have to at least ensure God's safety and whereabouts, right? That's right. If I were the commander, I would definitely bring a group of people with me to protect the god at all times. Because that's the final mission. Dora grunted. Okay, then our first and second questions have been answered. The god has been teleported out of the creation god district. And those gnomes also followed the god out of the creation god district at the same time. The reason they could leave was because of that magic array. That magic array was probably the last resort. Shea frowned and said, "But that's not right. Since the gnome army was teleported away with the gnome god using the magic array. But the gnome god was teleported here. And how did the gnome army appear in that valley? The distance between the two sides is too far. This doesn't make sense. This is indeed a problem that we can't deduce." Dora smiled bitterly, "But there's one more thing. At least, I think that the god created by the gnomes must have something to do with the scorpions." Shea raised his eyebrows and smiled bitterly. "Your deduction doesn't hold water. But it's really strange that these giant scorpion monsters appeared in that valley and here. Did you forget that the scorpion monster in the valley had a mental attack? It directly caused 2 of your subordinates to faint on the spot. This kind of silent mental attack, coupled with the gnome army that mysteriously died in the valley, can't you make any connections?" Shea frowned. "You mean assuming that these scorpions were created by the gnomes themselves, but those gnomes died in the hands of these scorpions that they created? No matter how powerful these scorpion monsters are, the mental attack they release is definitely far from being able to kill thousands of elite gnomes in an instant." Dora heard this and sneered. "If the scorpions can't do it, then what about the god?" Shea's heart immediately trembled. But at this moment, he suddenly heard a pada sound coming from behind him. Turning his head, Shea immediately looked in surprise. A giant scorpion had already climbed down from the hole above him. It was attached to the edge of the hole at the top of the cave. A ball of green mucus was falling from its mouth onto the ground. And that scorpion's brain was aimed at Shea. Its huge body slid down the wall of the cave bit by bit, and it was already in an attacking posture. Shea immediately complained in his heart. "Damn that bastard Hastings, what the hell is he doing? Wasn't he going to open up a path and kill all these scorpions first? Why did he let one come down?" Lao Tzu was now unarmed. The only thing that could deal with the scorpion's hard shell, the flaming fork, had been borrowed by that old bastard Hastings. Damn it! Dora, do you have any ideas? Shea retreated while swallowing his saliva. "There is a way." "What? Idiot! Run." Sorry. Originally, today was supposed to explode, but there was a small problem with my body. It's not too serious, just a small problem. So, today's explosion didn't happen. Originally, I wanted to force myself to continue writing, but I've only written 4,000 words. Clearly, I can't hold on any longer. Don't worry, I won't go back on my word. The above chapter can be considered Thursday's update. Friday's update is the real explosion, so it can be considered a day later. Friday's update volume is guaranteed to be at least 10,000. My goal is 15,000. Still, I'm shamelessly asking for monthly votes. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author, support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.